Southwest England through the evening. That'll scoot away. A few showers will come into parts of the east. We may see a little bit of snow over the hills, but generally it'll be just rain showers that we see coming in, and not many of those. Most places dry. Clear skies for Scotland, Northern Ireland will allow a frost, and even further south we will see a frost, certainly in rural areas, and many towns and cities will get close to freezing. So it is a cold start to the weekend. It'll stay pretty chilly, despite some good spells of sunshine. Again, quite a brisk and cold wind in the east, and there will be a few showers here. It's not going to be completely dry. A few showers for central and eastern parts of England, but nothing too heavy. Certainly further west and north, it's looking like a dry day, but temperatures will be lower, a lot colder than it has felt over the past couple of days. As we go through Saturday evening, not a great deal of change. One or two isolated showers in the east. Most places staying dry. Again, where we have clear skies, there will be a frost on Sunday morning. Probably quite cloudy skies during Sunday, but still some sunshine coming through. Again, a brisk and cold wind blowing, particularly in the south, and temperatures lower than they have been. Goodbye.
I'm Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
All right, people, it's Friday, it's Patrick, Christys, and you're with me at 3. Let's go. It's exactly a year since Putin rolled the tanks in. Today, I'll be asking and answering the questions on everybody's minds. How much longer can we support Ukraine? How much more has Britain done than other nations? Could Putin be assassinated? And are you happier taking Ukrainian refugees than people coming across the channel? In other news, the word fireman is now offensive. Yeah, that's right. That's according to the Chief Fire Officer of Greater Manchester's Fire Brigade. What should it be instead, though? Fire them, do we think? I mean, this is the same fire service that got slammed for taking 2 hours to let rescuers into the Manchester arena as victims of the terror attack lay dying. So in my view, those fire chiefs, well, not the best. Moving on, cyclists versus drivers. Who owns the road? Two-wheeled, lycra-clad, GoPro-wearing maniacs? Or normal people who drive cars and listen to GB News? I will be asking, do cyclists get away with murder on the roads? And here's a turnip for the books. It's not the headline I originally put in there, but I was told it's pre-watershed. We're all being urged to eat more turnips. I still don't buy it, frankly, that there are these massive fruit and vegetable shortages everywhere you go, but most of the people complaining about it do look like they've never eaten a piece of fruit in their lives. And we are hosting a boxing match between Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson and Remainer protester Steve Bray. But should we have ring girls? It's divided the office. Are boxing ring girls an affront to feminism? GBViews at gbnews.uk. How long should we support Ukraine for? And should we ban ring girls? But first, though, it's the news headlines with Rhiannon Jones, who has come dressed as the Ukrainian flag.
Thanks, Patrick. I have indeed. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. A minute's silence was held across the UK this morning, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At Downing Street, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK to reflect on the country's losses. Britain's imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. In Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the past 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Former President Petro Poroshenko spoke to us about the human cost of Russia's invasion.
Can you imagine that Ukraine lost dozens and dozens of thousands of the innocent civilians from Bucha to Mariupol, from the military criminal Putin. But together, can you imagine that 8 million Ukrainians leave Ukraine and go abroad? 2.5 million of Ukrainian children go to the school abroad because of your solidarity. But this is the humanitarian disaster.
Poland has delivered its first Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine and says it's ready to supply more quickly. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki also says the country will train Ukrainians on F-16 fighter planes. Sweden, too, is expected to deliver 10 of the tanks, as well as anti-aircraft systems. That, as Defence Secretary Ben Wallace warns, the war could last another 12 months. He says the UK isn't in a position to send fighter jets to Ukraine immediately.
I think it's just really about managing the realities of saying, look, we just simply can't hand over Western jets and expect them to be used in the short term. I think what you can say is that if there are other countries with Russian or Soviet jets, which they could just transfer over, Britain will explore what it can do to give those countries that reassurance that their own skies will be protected. We've already done that in places like Romania and Poland, where we've flown patrols to help with protecting their skies, and obviously we have some air defence assets in Poland. So I think that is, to me, the best and quickest way we can help Ukraine.
In other news, Stormont leaders say they're united in standing with the Northern Ireland Police Service in the wake of Wednesday's shooting. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in a critical but stable condition after being shot by 2 masked gunmen at a sports centre in Omagh. Police say a 4th man has been arrested in connection with his attempted murder. Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle O'Neill describes it as an attack on the entire community.
I think it's important that we continue to send a united message to wider society. We this year celebrate 25 years of our Good Friday Agreement, and so much that's been achieved over those past 25 years. Our society has been completely transformed, and we're not going to allow anybody to reverse any of that progress that's been made. So that's why it's very important that we do put across today that this is an attack on the community, this is an attack on all of us, and this is an attack that none of us will ever tolerate.
Junior doctors will stage 3 days of strike action next month. The British Medical Associations announced they'll walk off the job from the 13th of March. Nearly 37,000 BMA members voted in favour of industrial action. That's the largest ever turnout for a ballot of doctors. It follows a series of strikes by nurses and ambulance workers. Puffin UK has announced Roald Dahl's classic collection will keep the author's original texts in print. It follows criticism of recent editing of his work to remove potentially offensive language. It's understood Puffin will continue with the publication of the amended texts as well as releasing the originals. Camilla, the Queen Consort, yesterday urged authors to resist curbs on freedom of expression. And it's official. 3 candidates are now running to become the next SNP leader. Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan all secured enough votes to advance to the next round of the leadership contest. They managed to secure the backing of at least 100 members from a minimum of 20 local branches. A period of campaigning now gets underway with the winner announced on the 27th of March. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to you, Patrick.
So remarkably, the emails are already flooding in about our turnip story that we're going to be doing later. Everyone's saying that we should eat more turnips. And there's been a suggestion in from Richard. I'm going to leave the nation hanging, Richard, but let you know that you will be a happy man a little bit later on because we will be doing exactly what you've suggested. GBviews at gbnews.uk. The big one that I'm asking for your take on today is how much longer should we continue to support Ukraine? Why? Because the noises are this is going to be some kind of long stalemate with the battle with Russia, and it's been going on now for exactly a year. And I think at some point we as a nation are going to have a conversation about how long we continue the level of support. Many of you, I am well aware, think that should just go on indefinitely for as long as it takes, as much as it takes. And frankly, quite a few of you really don't think that. So we're going to have that discussion now, OK? Because today, 24th of February, marks a year since Russia's unprecedented invasion of Ukraine. Now, in those 12 months, Britain has stepped up big time, sending billions in aid and weapons and pledging to resolutely stand by Zelenskyy and his countrymen. But for how long should we continue to provide support? Strong views on either side of this, so get them coming in. But joining me now is Russia expert, it's Danny Armstrong. Danny, thank you very, very much. A little bit later on, we're going to have a look at exactly what Britain has done compared to some other EU nations and other nations around the world. But how much longer do you think Britain is realistically going to have to support Ukraine? Is Putin going anywhere?
Well, I think the short answer to that is no. I think what the UK has done in providing aid to Ukraine was needed. Of course, it rebuffed Russia entering Kiev, Russian troops. In the first days of the war, it led to huge territorial losses in especially the northeast of Ukraine and, of course, in Kharkiv. And what that led to is a huge rejig in the objective of this special military operation, as it's being called in Russia, of course, this war and invasion of Ukraine. Those objectives were limited to just protecting the people of Donbass. Now, before the war, the pretext was to denazify Ukraine and demilitarize Ukraine. When Russia realized they couldn't do that, and of course that was in part to some of the aid that was provided by the West, then the objective and the whole face of the war kind of changed. And Putin realized that it wasn't going to take just a few days or even a few weeks for Ukraine to roll over, and that it was going to take a lot longer. Now, the question now is how much longer should it take? And now, I think some of the rhetoric coming out of the Kremlin was quite prevalent today on the one-year anniversary of the invasion, especially from the embassy in London, the Russian embassy, that is, that said that this neo-Nazi anti-Russian spearhead that is Ukraine, that is backed by the Kiev regime, was one of the main components, one of the main reasons why Russia was had no choice but to launch this special military operation. Now, the Western aid, what that does in Russia, that garners huge support for Putin, who see his main supporters see him as the man and as the main force to restore Russia to this reverence and respectability of the Soviet Union. As we've seen, many of the headlines have been a return to the USSR. It's got really little to do with borders and that expanding border of what the empire was before it crumbled in 1991, and a lot to do with Russian pride, Russian culture, Russian history, which Putin sees as being under threat from the West And the fact that the West is committed to this aid, it kind of justifies that pretext by the Kremlin that they are, in fact, at war with the West and that they need to preserve their cultural and historical interests.
And Putin seems quite happy to let this thing rumble on, which I think, Danny, means that the British taxpayer has to just buckle up and, unless there's a rapid change at the top of our government, accept the fact that billions of pounds every single year, and that's probably only going to increase as we have to restock our military, is going to be sent to Ukraine. And at some point, the British public is probably going to have a conversation with how much of that they are comfortable with when we have issues of our own right here at home. But yes, your view is that we are just, as things stand, going to have to strap ourselves in and keep sending billions of pounds to Ukraine.
Well, yeah, I do agree with that in part, but I think what an important point is that each side and each country in this conflict has kind of reverted to their World War II roles. Of course, we have the UK with this Churchillian fight against fascism, this call to defeat fascism, which has taken on the form of Russia. Ukraine is once again invaded and occupied. The US is becoming embroiled in a war that has been instigated and is being carried on in the theatre in Europe. The only nation who was involved who is slightly different from their stance in World War II is Germany, and that is because of their stance in World War II. They were hesitant to send lethal aid to a nation in Europe to fund a war. Now, what I think people don't understand is the mentality of Russians, and certainly of Putin. It's one of the things that he sees as upholding and sees as paramount to uphold in this conflict is the fact that if you ask any Russian who defeated Nazism and who defeated fascism in 1945, it would be Russia because of those huge losses that they suffered. And that is prevalent in Vladimir Putin's rhetoric that he needs to go forward and just keep mobilizing troops and keep this war going on for as long as possible. That is what the West is up against, and that's where the aid is going towards, to defeat that narrative and that mentality.
Danny, thank you very, very much. Danny Armstrong there, who's a Russia expert. And look, already the emails are coming in on this, and it is the typically mixed bag. This is from Patricia, who says, Patrick, we have to choose whether to help stop Putin in Ukraine now or wait until he gets to Calais. And this is a massive question that I'm going to be asking, because there's that argument, isn't there? But I don't know how true this is, and this is what I'm hoping to find out together throughout the course of this show, which is there actually a huge amount of evidence that if Putin, I'm not saying he should take Ukraine, absolutely not, far from it, the hypothetical situation in which Putin gets a large chunk of Ukraine, OK? Does he stop there? What is the evidence to say he's going to keep rolling through Europe or nab up other parts of Eastern Europe, for example? Is that just a chance that's not worth taking? Because then I look just slightly above the inbox here and it goes, it's from Daniel, it's not our war. It seems to be a strange war. And there we go. So I want to know what you think about this, and I want to drill down as to whether or not there is much evidence that if some kind of deal is struck now, which, by the way, it's worth noting neither side appears to want, but if some deal was struck now, what is the actual evidence for people who say, well, we can't do that because Putin, he will just keep on going? Because if he isn't going to keep on going, then actually, do we really need to, quote-unquote, stop him now? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Boris Johnson, though, led the West response to the Russia invasion, didn't he? While countries like Germany and France hesitated, the UK government, well, we didn't hesitate in offering military aid as well as humanitarian support. Now, since Boris Johnson resigned, the UK has continued to play its part, and some, by the way. A squadron of Challenger 2 tanks was sent to Ukraine last month alone. But what impact are we having compared to other members of the Western Alliance? And this is another angle to the conflict that I'm very keen to get more info on, because, frankly, I'm a bit sick and tired of Britain being the world's piggy bank in general. And when I look around at some of the facts and figures here, OK, all right, we were second only to the United States, and you look at the size of the United States in their economy, etc., in terms of military aid and help, both militarily and, indeed, humanitarian. 2.3 billion quid of military aid was sent to Ukraine by you, the taxpayer, in 2022. Loads of people think that's money well spent, and from what I can gather as well, many of you would happily send a lot more. We've also had specialist training for Ukrainian troops. That's currently taking place. There is, of course, talk about fighter jets being sent over as well. We've had the Challenger tanks that I've mentioned, 200 armoured vehicles, at least 100 logistical vehicles. Concerns, though, from a lot of people that we're leaving ourselves weak in all of this. And then when we look over to the European Union and we see that cohort there of quite a number of states doesn't appear to have done anything that's a patch on us whatsoever, and if Putin is going to continue to roll through Ukraine and into Europe, would it not be them who were affected first? And at what point do we say, I think it's time for you guys to step up a little bit more? It's worth noting, isn't it, before I go to my guest, that for quite a long period of time in this conflict, the European Union nations were willing to pretty much allow Putin to take Ukraine and then mop up the humanitarian disaster afterwards. Throw their arms around Ukrainian citizens, fine, but not really actually do anything to stop Putin taking the land. And a lot of people would find that unforgivable. With me now is Niall Gardner, who's the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom. Niall, thank you very much. How do you rate Britain's response compared to, let's just keep it quite local, European nations?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show today, Patrick. And without a doubt, as you pointed out, Great Britain has been the leader in Europe in terms of military support for Ukraine. And if you look at the figures, about £2.3 billion of British military assistance, that's nearly as much as the entire European Union, actually. I think it's about 3 billion euros or so from the entire EU in terms of military assistance. So the UK has provided immense military support for the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians really understand this, they acknowledge this, that there's no bigger friend and supporter in Europe today than Brexit Britain. And the reality is that the UK outside of the European Union has been able to act as the leader of Europe, frankly, in support of the Ukrainians. And while the French and the Germans basically have really bided their time with regard to support for Ukraine, Britain, right from day one, was sending thousands of anti-tank missiles to the Ukrainians, also, of course, training large numbers of Ukrainian troops on British soil. And the French and the Germans really have been, in contrast, I would say, quite pathetic. And in fact, behind the scenes, both Macron and Scholz have been trying to negotiate or get a deal done with the Russians, actually, to end the war. Of course, that would only benefit Putin.
There was that quite famous picture, wasn't there, of Emmanuel Macron sat at the end of a very long table somewhere in the different postcode to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
One of the main arguments, and we're going to have discussions with military experts on this and Russian experts as well about the psychology of Vladimir Putin. But one of the main arguments as to why we need to keep sending a load of money and a load of military equipment, etc., over to Ukraine is because if we don't, Putin will take Ukraine and he won't stop there. He will go all the way through Europe. Well, if European nations really believed that, why wouldn't they do more to contribute to the war effort themselves? Why is it Britain who's got to foot the bill to a large extent?
It's a great question, really. And so if you look at the contributions made by the Baltic states, directly bordering Russia, of course, they have made a tremendous contribution in terms of percentage of their own GDP. So they've done a lot. Also, the Poles, of course, have been outstanding in supporting Ukraine. But if you go to Western Europe, you have this appeasement mindset and mentality, especially in Germany. Also, you see that as well in many Western European nations. And it is a very sad state of mind, actually, whereby they're completely dependent upon the US and British military umbrella. And so they're quite happy to rely upon the US and the UK for their own defense, while, of course, the US and Britain does the heavy lifting in terms of military assistance for Ukraine. And so, in my view, I don't think the Germans would even be able to defend themselves against a Russian invasion. They wouldn't even fight, actually. They would just surrender. And were it not for the NATO alliance, I do think the Russians would be storming across Western Europe today without any doubt. And certainly the likes of the Germans, for example, wouldn't even defend themselves.
Yeah. Now, I am acutely aware, that this is one of the most polarising issues that I ever talk about on the show. And that's saying something, because we do try to, every single day, buckle up and tackle head-on some of the most controversial issues and at times in the most bombastic way that we possibly can of the day. But Ukraine is one that absolutely divides everyone. Like this one, Jenny, get in touch. She says, we forget history at our peril. Appeasers said Hitler would stop and he didn't. And then literally the one above it, this is America's war, not ours. It's a matter of record concerning their involvement, etc., etc., etc. We're throwing money away at something that does not help us. Why can't we put it into our NHS, says Michelle. So a complete mixed bag. I want to ask you, Niall, if this is going to end up in some kind of stalemate, and it is going to cost us, at a minimum, around £2.5 billion a year, at what point will the British taxpayer have to have a serious adult conversation about this and say, right, look, enough's enough now. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Vladimir Putin, you're going to have to form some kind of compromise deal because we're skin.
Well, those are very good questions, Patrick. And one of your guests actually referred to this as America's war. Actually, this is Europe's war. It's in Europe's backyard. And if the Russians get away with invading Ukraine, they will move on to Western Europe next, if they could. So this is Europe's war, definitely. And the whole of Europe has interest actually in defeating the Russians. I would say in terms of the long term, the UK has to increase defence spending. There's not enough money, frankly. And I would transfer, for example, a huge chunk of the £11 billion spent on foreign aid over to the defence budget, because Britain's going to need this money.
Well, you say
continue
that.
Supporting
You say that, but we're spending a lot of our foreign aid budget, it would appear anyway, on the small boats crisis in the Channel, and we're spending a lot of it on a variety of different things as well, giving it to some nations that, frankly, have got space programmes, nuclear programmes, and certainly for a little while anyway, in the case of, I think it was the Ethiopian Spice Girls, a bang-average music career. But yes, supposedly maybe we should be doing that. Look, Niall, thank you very, very much. Great to get your insights there. That is Niall Gardner, there is Director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom. It is a polarising topic, and I make no excuses for talking about it. I am very on the fence, generally. I don't like to be on the fence, as regular viewers and listeners to this show will know, but I can see both sides of this. I absolutely think what Putin has done is unbelievable. It's terrible. I mean, it's deadly. It's borderline genocidal, and that kind of behaviour needs to be stopped. And I think Britain has done the right thing, certainly initially, to go there and throw everything at him. And if it wasn't for us, and America, to be fair, if it wasn't for us in America, there is every chance that the Russian flag would be hoisted above Kiev now, wouldn't it? But I can also see a longer-term picture. I cover on this show every single day strikes. And while some of those pay demands are unrealistic and probably a little bit rum, at the same time, there are people who are massively, massively struggling with the cost of living crisis. And then we look at some of the other money that we're spending when it comes to the small boats crisis, etc., 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 and the fact that our own armed forces are unfortunately not massively the envy of the world anymore. Can we continue, really, to keep dishing them out abroad? So I can see both sides of this, and I want your views on it. GBViews at gbnews.uk, 1 year on from Putin first rolling the tanks in. Let's have a little look now, on that note, actually, of the latest edition, a sparkling edition, of GB News' People's Poll. Yes, it's Friday, it's People's Poll time, ladies and gentlemen. And this week, we asked whether the UK should continue to provide military aid to Ukraine. A big majority of the people were in favour. So 66% of people said they either support or strongly support the UK government helping to arm Ukraine. What I think is interesting is, so just 8% of people, that's 8% of people, opposed or strongly opposed the government's programme. And I want to hear from both sides. I'm getting a lot of the strongly support in at the minute. I want to know if you're part of the 8% who think we shouldn't. Why not? GBViews at gbnews.uk. But the UK provided £2.3 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine in 2022 alone. And this afternoon, I want to hear from you. And I want to know whether or not you think enough is enough now, or should that money be spent on things like the NHS? Should it be used to help millions of families who are struggling with the cost of living crisis? I do want to hear from you. gbviews at gbnews.uk. And if you do think we should continue to support Ukraine, which, well, clearly the majority of you do, 66% apparently, why and for how long? OK, let's have a reasonable discussion about all of this. But someone who you can't keep out of the news. You just can't keep him out of the news, this guy. The Archbishop of Canterbury, yes, I mean, it's nice to know, isn't it, that Christianity has got itself completely sorted so we can now wade into politics and international affairs. But Justin Welby has once again got involved in other people's business. This time, he's had his say on the war in Ukraine. Oh, it's topical. We'll talk about that a little later on. We've got all of that coming your way and much, much more, by the way, including some rather spicy discussions about whether or not boxing ring girls are sexist and who is the bigger menace on the road, OK? Drivers or cyclists? I'll see you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, nah, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Well, just while we were off air there, I was told that we've got some breaking news to bring you, I think, and I'm going to go over to Northern Ireland very shortly. A 4th man has been arrested in Northern Ireland after the shooting of an off-duty police officer on Wednesday evening. Detective Chief Inspector John Coldwell was shot multiple times in front of his young son. GB News' Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie is there for us. Doogie, thank you very much. Yes, so there have been some developments in the last few minutes. Could you tell us more, please?
Well, there has indeed. The Deputy Chief Constable Mark McEwen has said that they are now treating this as a terrorist act, an act of terror, and that they are fairly and squarely pointing the finger at the new IRA. This will give them more scope inside legal terms to make arrests, hold for longer, and of course question longer. And when they are looking or searching premises, they can be more flexible in exactly what they're doing there. So they now have pointed the finger fairly and squarely at the new IRA.
Goodness me. OK, all right, Doogie. And, yeah, and just in terms of the latest, in terms of the condition of the individual who was shot as well, what do we know about that?
Well, we do know that he is still in a critical and very serious condition in hospital. He is still being held in a coma in order that, or a medical coma, an induced coma, to make sure that he has a better chance of recovery. The deputy or the chief constable today was saying that he was with the family yesterday and last night, and that, I mean, basically the whole community here. There was a press conference here earlier on. All 5 political parties stood together with the Chief Constable and give him their backing, united in saying that this type of behaviour cannot happen inside Northern Ireland. And even that 20 years ago would have not have ever have happened. So it is moving fast. It is fast-paced and fast-moving. Another arrest this morning, a 22-year-old man arrested in the Coal Island area. He's been held with 3 others who are anywhere from 38 to 47 years of age. They're being held in Musgrave Street Serious Crime Unit, and they are being held under the Anti-Terrorism Act.
OK, Doogie, thank you very, very much. That's GB News' Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie there, who's just reacting to the latest developments, the breaking news following that Omagh shooting being treated, of course, as terror-related. Right, now, look, later this hour, ladies and gentlemen, I am going, yes, to talk turnips. No, it's not the headline I was hoping for, but it's pre-watershed, so we're going to have to leave it at that. But you heard me right. With the country suffering from a fruit and veg shortage, a government minister says that people should eat turnips. I'll be asking a farmer to speak up in support of the humble turnip. I am also going to play you one of the most iconic TV clips that you've ever seen as well. We've got some other big debates today, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday after all. Should ring girls be banned? And does the word fireman offend you? Because apparently it should. But now it's your headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Patrick, thank you. It's 3:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. A minute's silence was held across the UK this morning, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At Downing Street, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK to reflect on the country's losses. Britain's imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. In Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the past 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died following Russia's invasion, which has resulted in the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. And to that breaking news story, police in Northern Ireland say they're treating the shooting of an officer in Omagh as terrorist-related, with the new IRA the primary line of inquiry. Stormont says it's united in standing with the Northern Ireland Police Service in the wake of Wednesday's shooting. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in a critical but stable condition after being shot by 2 masked gunmen at a sports centre. A 4th man has been arrested in connection with his attempted murder. And it's official. 3 candidates are now running to become the next SNP leader. Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan all secured enough votes to advance to the next round of the leadership contest. They managed to secure the backing of at least 100 members from a minimum of 20 local branches. A period of campaigning now gets underway, with the winner announced on the 27th of March. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Yeah, well, it's an action-packed show today, ladies and gentlemen. Loads of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Ukraine. I've got quite a few other stories, a bit lighter, to be fair, coming your way. It's Friday after all. But let's delve into the inbox now, because I've been asking a question that I think maybe in a year or 2 years' time we're going to all be asking ourselves rather a lot. Maybe with a slightly less emotional standpoint than, of course, today, with it being a year exactly since Putin rolled the tanks into Ukraine. And that question really is, for how much longer would you be comfortable with us supporting Ukraine to the extent that we are? And why or why not? Tom says, we must support Ukraine to the end. And it's all in capitals there, so he really means it. If not, who's next? Poland, Moldova, Britain? This madman won't stop. And it's that's another big question to this, isn't it? Look, I am not disputing for a single second, by the way, Tom, that Vladimir Putin is clearly, pretty unhinged, to say the least, right? Will he stop? Would he not stop? Is it a chance that we can take? What is the actual hard evidence that he wouldn't stop? I suppose just the fact that he's unhinged would be good enough reason for many people to think that he wouldn't. Kathleen says, I strongly feel we should support Ukraine for as long as it takes. After all, they are the ones doing all the fighting on our behalf to prevent Putin from invading whichever country he fancies. Now, this is becoming a very common theme, isn't it? That people think that he wouldn't just stop at Ukraine, and that's absolutely fair enough. Hopefully we never have to find out, right? And it is also a good point, isn't it? I think Boris Johnson said this, doesn't it? That we are maybe paying in terms of money and equipment, but the Ukrainians are paying in blood, and that is a big difference, actually. David says, while we keep sending weapons, both sides are losing lives. It seems people think it's OK for us to keep it going as long as none of us are getting attacked. Well, this is the other thing, isn't it? Are we prolonging the war? Is the war being prolonged? But what's the alternative? You know, should Ukraine really just go, OK, all right, we'll draw a line around a little bit of our country and we'll keep that, and, you know, big mad Vlad can have the other bit. And Putin, would he stop there, as we've already spoken about? So, yeah, difficult to know what the solution is there. Heather says, it's not our war. Why should we aid this war when it's not our war? We are not benefiting from this. And, yeah, like I've said, it is very much a mixed bag. One thing that I will say that stands out to me is that I am very much on the fence about this, in the sense that I can see, absolutely, that we did the right thing initially. I am concerned about what happens going forward and whether or not we can continue to do this. And in response to me saying that, I am getting us a highly edited selection of our emails there. In response to this, I can see the emails coming in with loads of people going, oh, you are shelling for Vladimir Putin, how dare you? And then another load of you going, how dare you not stand up for the nurses and for the people who are going on strike and people who are struggling with the cost of living crisis. So maybe I'm doing something right, because I seem to be winding absolutely everybody up with this, but I want your views. It's good stuff. We've also had a couple of emails here just quickly on the debate we're going to be doing later, which is about whether or not ring girls should be allowed. We are looking to host a boxing match between Lee Anderson, yes, that's right, the Tory deputy chair, and the Ramona with a megaphone, Steve Bray. And we were just discussing whether or not we should go the whole hog and have ring girls. Anna says, ring girls don't offend me. I think they're all women. Michelle says, yes, I think we should have ring girls, actually, otherwise Miss World would be cancelled. And a man called Ray has been in touch, but unfortunately for Ray, I won't read it out online. It does appear that you have emailed in off your wife's email address, Ray, but you have, in no uncertain terms, told me how much you enjoy the idea of ring girls. So, GBviews at gbnews.uk, keep them coming in. After the break, I will ask, should the head of the Church of England be getting involved in politics, OK? Because it's happened again. Should he just wind his neck in? I'll see you in 2.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Yes, indeed. It's Moggy Monday, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very shortly, you'll be able to obviously watch and listen to our newest recruit here, Jacob Rees-Mogg. What a show that's going to be. But welcome back. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is speaking at a press conference in Kiev, apparently. So let's have a little listen, shall we?
Experts are telling that we have a war of exhaustion, and not a single party would have resources to have an victory, clear victory, and then there will be a negotiation. So how do these negotiations look like? What's the ultimate victory for Ukraine looks like? I'm not thinking theoretically about how those negotiations could take place. We make very specific steps. Ukraine has initiated the peace formula at G20, although we would really like to have it G19, not G20 in the world. So we've briefed everyone on the peace formula, how we see that. And then there's the outcome of what Russia has done here and how it has an impact not only on our security, because there are different crises caused by Russia's aggressive steps. As you know, the occupation of the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia, and then the blocking of the sea and all the chains of supply as part of the food security. You know all of those aspects. So,
OK, all right, so that is Volodymyr Zelenskyy there. Now, he is currently holding a press conference in Kiev. We will no doubt bring you the highlights of that as and when they drop. Moving on, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has been making the headlines once again. You know that guy, he married Harry and Meghan, didn't he? Although definitely not in secret, because that would have been, of course, yet another whopping lie that was told to Oprah. But this time, he just couldn't help himself but weigh in on the war in Ukraine, suggesting that Russia should not be punished similarly to that of Germany after the First World War. Well, writing in The Telegraph, Welby says that Russia should not be forced into accepting an agreement like the Treaty of Versailles. In 1919, the Germans were forced to pay huge reparations, had to agree to limit the size of their army to 100,000, and they also lost key territories. Now, as the head of the Church of England, is Welby right to speak out, or is this none of his business? And actually, arguably, as well, is what he's saying absolute, complete and utter tosh. Joining me now to discuss all of this is political commentator Reem Ibrahim. Reem, thank you very much. Why does Justin Welby feel as though it's his duty to talk about absolutely everything?
Because he's got this sort of, I think I saw this in the Spectator earlier, milk and water ideology where they have absolutely no principles. I mean, you know, the fact is that he's a public figure, he's a religious figure, he shouldn't be commenting on these issues. And I think he's actually got the history wrong here. I mean, the Treaty of Versailles was not as punitive as many historians have made them out to be. Actually, the revisionist school of thought within his historiography have actually argued that the Treaty of Versailles wasn't punitive enough. They didn't have any measure that sort of meant that these things would be dried out. Hitler ended up actually just going against it entirely, and it meant that the Allies actually decided, you know what, we'll let him increase the army. So I think he's got his history wrong. He shouldn't be commenting on it.
But what I find interesting is the wider discussion about Justin Welby, because he is wading in on all things political, the Rwanda scheme, for example, also now almost kind of really revising Christianity in many ways to do with same-sex marriage and all of this. And I'm just wondering, do you think he maybe thinks that he is God?
I don't know if he thinks he's God, but I think he definitely thinks he has the right to sort of change history. I mean, again, when it comes to Russia-Ukraine, this sort of revisionist comparisons to historical events, I think, is just unhelpful. I don't think he thinks he's God. I think he does think he's a slightly almighty figure where he thinks he can change those things. I mean, look, whatever your views are on homosexuality and whether you believe that within, Christianity, same-sex marriage is allowed or not, or if it is a sin or not, whatever you think that, if you think that's the case, it is pretty clear in the Bible. And again, it is this sort of revisionist school of thought.
What is really fascinating, though, is at the minute we have a situation in Scotland where Kate Forbes expresses her own views. Now, plenty of people disagree with them, by the way. You know, I don't happen to agree with everything that she says. She takes a, what would you say, an evangelical, fundamentalist Christian approach to things like gay marriage, etc., which, by the way, is echoed in pretty much every single major world religion. There's similar views there. That potentially is going to bar her from high office. Tim Farron, something similar happened to him, although I doubt the Lib Dems would have won by a landslide anyway. So you've got these things, but then here we have a religious figure who just can't stop getting involved in politics, and everyone just hangs on his word, and I don't understand that.
You know, you're absolutely right. I mean, like, my family are Muslim, and I'll be pretty open about the fact that many members of my family don't believe that homosexuality is OK, that they do believe that it's a sin. Would they ever want that to be legislated on? Absolutely not. And I think that's the same case with Kate Forbes. Clearly, what we have here is a religious figure that wants to butt into politics all the time. And actually, they've got something fundamentally wrong here. Putin is an aggressor. Putin is, you know, it was a year ago today that he invaded Ukraine, a sovereign country. And whether you think that we should be spending taxpayer money over in Ukraine is, again, an entirely different conversation. But we cannot be making these unhelpful historical comparisons. He's got it wrong, and he shouldn't be commenting on these things.
No, should he get his own house in order before he starts getting involved with everything else?
Well, I think he should get those debates within Christianity in order before he starts commenting on Russia, Ukraine, or whatever else he wants to comment on. But yeah, I think, look, he needs to sort of sort out those things that are happening within the United Kingdom, within Christianity, within those own domestic debates, which he should be an expert on, and then sort of leave Russia, Ukraine, leave that to the foreign policy experts.
Yeah, indeed. All right, Reem, look, thank you very much. Thank you for coming into the studio as well. That's political commentator Reem Ibrahim, just reacting to Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby's latest intervention, which, look, in a nutshell, was don't punish Putin too hard. A couple of things wrong with that. There is no end to this war in sight anyway, so he's jumped the gun, for want of a better phrase, there. There's also, I don't think, ever going to be a situation where Putin is in a situation where we have to do some kind of Treaty of Versailles thing with him. I just don't see how Putin's going to let that happen. So a slightly pointless intervention there. A lot of people are saying, no, enough is enough with all this religious figures getting involved in politics. So how do you stand on the idea of Justin Welby doing the same? But we're moving on now. We're moving on, because are you finding fruit and veg supplies are running low near you? I'm keen to get a bit of a postcode map of this, because everyone seems to be getting in touch with me with radically different stories about this. Some pictures of empty shelves in empty shops. Someone should write a song about that, shouldn't they? And some people going, this is absolute nonsense. You can't move for fruit and veg wherever I am. But apparently there is a national shortage of foods like tomatoes, cucumbers and peppers due to bad weather in countries which can grow them. So this now is apparently big news. And the shortage is expected to last until May. Oh, no. Some supermarkets have even started putting a cap on how much fruit and veg you can buy in one go. I cannot wait to see fights breaking out in the aisles where it turns out that Marjorie in Scunthorpe has put an extra courgette in her basket. But Environment Secretary Therese Coffey raised a few eyebrows when she suggested that people should eat turnips instead. Well, this put up the value of turnips, apparently. But do you remember, and this is something that someone asked us to do earlier on, and ask and you shall receive right here on this particular show on GB News. Do you remember what Baldrick spent on his turnip? You know, let's remind ourselves of this really iconic clip now from Blackadder, shall we?
I spent it. You spent it? What could you possibly spend £400,000 on? Oh, God, don't tell me. My dream turnip. Ulrich, how did you manage to find a turnip that cost £400,000? Well, I had to haggle.
Yes, there you go. What a turnip. I doubt you will find a turnip that size, but Downing Street says that Ms Coffey has simply been setting out the importance of celebrating the produce that we grow here in the UK. Someone who does understand the importance of British produce is Mark Summers, who's a beef and arable farmer from Buckinghamshire. Thank you very much. So, look, can you sell the idea of turnips to me?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of myself, but there is definitely something in eating seasonal foods. Like, we depend too much on imports, and we have such a variety of things that we can grow in this country, and if like we were to eat things more seasonally when they're available, it'd stop a lot of those problems of food shortages. And the other thing is we waste an awful lot of food. So like the amount of food waste is a sin, and we're throwing away food that's perfectly good. Even the food that goes to the shelves, like there's a large percentage of that's rejected because it's either a funny shape or too big or too small. And we just need to be eating a bit more sensibly.
Yeah, is the people who are getting angry about some of the foods that are not available at the minute just crybabies, really? Because have they been spoilt by the fact that we're used to the, all year round, whatever you want, whenever you want it? Whereas in actual fact, we have more than enough to go around in this country. We should probably be eating seasonal stuff. And if we didn't waste as many things as we do, then we'd all be better off anyway, Mark.
Yeah, I think so. And there's another thing to be said for people who, want to try and grow their own tomatoes and stuff like that, rather than importing them from other countries. Like the food miles on tomatoes, avocados, almonds, anything like that, it's quite ridiculous the energy that's spent on getting those foods here, when a large portion of them we can grow ourselves in our own personal greenhouses. It's cheaper to do that as well, and like a lot of people might find it's actually enjoyable to grow your own produce.
But can you just talk to me a bit about wonky veg? Because I couldn't give a stuff about what the swede that I eat or the turnip that I eat or whatever looks like. I just don't care. But why have we got to a situation where every single thing that we eat apparently has to look like it's just been hand-carved by the same person who did the Sistine Chapel? Why do we have to do that? Why can't we just eat wonky veg?
I think people have just kind of been a bit spoiled over the last few decades and used to having better quality food, and people are probably have a bit more disposable income than they used to, and they'll spend a bit more on the food that they want. And as a result, the supermarkets have just, decided to put out their best produce because they're buying it up so cheaply. They can afford to chuck away the bad ones and try and sell their best produce and keep the good stuff on the shelves, because people, there's just a kind of a bit of a mindset, I suppose, where people like it has to look right and has to look good,
OK, Mark, look, thank you very much. Mark Summers there, who, whilst not being a massive fan of turnips himself, and I think he made that crystal clear at the start, can understand why maybe we should all be eating more of them, and you love to see it. Thank you very much. He's a beef and arable farmer from Buckinghamshire. That is the news that Therese Coffey has been telling us all, that we can just eat turnips. What's wrong with eating seasonal fruit and veg? And doesn't this just show, yet again, the need for self-dependency when it comes to things like that? Well, look, a bit of a gear change here, some unexpected news nonetheless, some sad news, unfortunately, to bring you. In the last few minutes, it's been confirmed that Sir Bernard Ingham, who was the long-serving press secretary for Margaret Thatcher, has sadly died aged 90 after a short illness, and the news was confirmed by his family. So I just want to bring you that. I'll read that again in case you just missed it, which is the breaking news that it's been confirmed that Sir Bernard Ingham, who was the long-serving press secretary for Margaret Thatcher, has sadly died aged 90 after a short illness. So, yes, we'll bring you more on that if we get any more detail, of course. Now, I'm just going to finish this hour by delving into the quite often terrifying world of my inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We've got some big ones coming for you. I'm going to swerve the Ukraine stuff for now, OK? I think we've had enough of that for 1 hour. And just tease ahead to something that I'm doing, which is drivers versus cyclists, OK? Joan Collins, of all people, has piped up and told Sadiq Khan to get a grip, and the cyclists should be, fined, etc., if they break the law. Do you think that cyclists get away with, at times, maybe even murder on the roads? And I've been asking you, who's the biggest menace on the road? And we're going to be having a big debate on this. Drivers versus cyclists. And it's great, because you always find people who are incredibly passionate about it on both sides. Pete says, nothing spoils a Sunday morning drive in the country quicker than rounding a bend and finding a group of middle-aged, lycra-clad men taking up half of the road. Why can't they just get themselves an exercise bike and annoy the people in their house instead? Why do they need to cycle 3 abreast as well? And it always looks like a group of middle-aged men, right, who are clearly going through some kind of crisis, either at home or in their own heads, who sew themselves into lycra. It looks like someone's pumped a sock full of custard, doesn't it? Then they just go out and decide to cycle 3 abreast and ruin their day. It's like the Tour de Fat, isn't it? Anyway, my views on this are clearly pretty clear. Also, another big one that we're going to be doing as well, which is fireman. Does the term fireman offend you? Because supposedly now we have to call them either fire people, fire thems, if you ask Sam Smith. Anyway, the guy at the top of Greater Manchester Fire Service has said that the term fireman is indeed sexist. So there we go. We'll be having a big debate about that. More wokery gone mad, isn't it? GBViews at gbnews.uk. In the next hour, though, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, will speak to the UN Security Council. And, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be pleased to know we'll be bringing you that live. But I believe now it's time for a very quick break. Fireman, see, it's not offensive, is it?
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update. It's Friday afternoon, which means the weekend is almost here. Most of us won't see much rain, a colder feel, particularly where it's windy. It's going to be mostly dry, though, because this area of high pressure is moving in. Not quite here yet, however, and this weather front has been slowly sinking south through the day across much of England and Wales. And it's still providing a bit of rain across parts of South Wales, Southwest England this evening. Nothing too heavy, and it should clear away. Got a northerly wind. You'll have noticed that if you cross eastern Scotland and eastern England today, bringing a real chill. And that will continue overnight and will feed a few scattered showers into the east, but many places dry and clear and cold. Temperatures widely close to freezing in towns and cities and well below in rural spots, maybe as low as -4. So a chilly start to Saturday, but for quite a few it'll be a sunny start. We'll still have this breeze coming into eastern England, so it's going to be cold on these North Sea coasts, and there will be a few showers coming in at times as well. Nothing too heavy, and they should move through, but perhaps into parts of the Midlands, maybe southern England as well. But most places, certainly further south and west and across Scotland, will be dry. But temperatures are only going to get to 6, 7, 8 Celsius for most, and feeling colder in that wind, and certainly colder than it has been over recent days. Chilly evening to come then on Saturday evening if you're heading out, and again where skies stay clear, the map turns blue, suggesting there will be frost. And again on Sunday, not a great deal of change for many. It'll be a fine sunny start, certainly for Scotland, Northern Ireland, southern England. Quite a bit of cloud in the central and eastern parts, with just a few showers feeding into maybe Lincolnshire, down towards the East Midlands. A bit of a stronger breeze in southern counties and still noticeably chilly on the North Sea coasts of England. But away from the breeze, Scotland, Northern Ireland feeling pleasant enough, but certainly further south, quite a cold feel through this weekend.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, it's Friday, everybody. It's Patrick Christys right here on GB News. Let's go, shall we? It's exactly a year since Putin rolled the tanks in, and this hour I will be asking and answering a big question. What exactly is the Russian tyrant's end game? If he conquered Ukraine, how much further would he really go? I've got a unique solution to this problem, which you might not want to miss. And the word fireman is now offensive. Yes, that's according to the Chief Fire Officer of Greater Manchester's Fire Brigade. What should it be instead? Fire them? Fire people? I'd possibly like to fire him, actually, but there we go. This is the same fire service that got slammed for taking 2 hours to let rescuers into the Manchester Arena as victims of the terror attack lay dying. So, you know, there is that, isn't there? Moving on, cyclist versus driver, a debate as old as, well, cars, I suppose. Who owns the road? Two-wheeled, lycra-clad, GoPro-wearing maniacs? Or normal people who drive cars and listen to GB News on the radio? I'll be asking, do cyclists get away with murder on the roads? And we're in talks to host a boxing match between Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson and Remainer protester Steve Bray. But should we have ring girls, OK? It's divided the office. Are boxing ring girls an affront to feminism? GB Views at gbnews.uk. How long should we support Ukraine for? That's what I want to know. How much longer would you be willing to support Ukraine for to the tune of billions of pounds a year, military resources, etc.? And should we ban boxing ring girls? GB Views at gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. A minute's silence was held across the UK this morning, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Well, at Downing Street, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK to reflect on the country's losses. Britain has imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and chief executive of Nord Stream 2. And in Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the last 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Well, former President Petro Poroshenko spoke to us about the human cost of Russia's invasion.
Can you imagine that Ukraine lost dozens and dozens of thousands of the innocent civilians from Bucha to Mariupol, from the military criminal Putin. But together, can you imagine that 8 million Ukrainians leave Ukraine and go abroad? 2.5 million of Ukrainian children go to the school abroad because of your solidarity. But this is the humanitarian disaster.
Well, Poland has delivered its first 2 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine and says it's ready to supply more quickly. The Polish Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, also says the country will train Ukrainians on F-16 fighter jets. Sweden, too, is expected to deliver 10 tanks, as well as anti-aircraft systems. Well, here in the UK, a street in central London has been called Kyiv Road to mark the year since Russian President Vladimir Putin sent his troops into Ukraine. Westminster City Council have given the name to a small section of Bayswater Road, a short distance from the Russian embassy. The council says it wants to show Ukrainian residents that their struggle has a visible place in our city. Well, in other news today, police in Northern Ireland say they're treating the shooting of an officer in Omagh as terrorist-related, with the new IRA the primary line of inquiry. Stormont says it's united in standing with the PSNI in the wake of Wednesday's shooting. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in a critical but stable condition after being shot by 2 masked gunmen at a sports centre. A 4th man has been arrested in connection with his attempted murder. Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle O'Neill described it as an attack on the entire community.
I think it's important that we continue to send a united message to wider society. We this year celebrate 25 years of our Good Friday Agreement, and so much that's been achieved over those past 25 years. Our society has been completely transformed, and we're not going to allow anybody to reverse any of that progress that's been made. So that's why it's very important that we do put across today that this is an attack on the community, this is an attack on all of us, and this is an attack that none of us will ever tolerate.
Junior doctors will stage 3 days of strike action next month. The British Medical Association has announced they'll walk off the job from the 13th of March. Nearly 37,000 BMA members voted in favour of industrial action. That's the largest ever turnout for a ballot of doctors, and it follows a series of strikes by nurses and ambulance workers. The publishers Puffin UK have announced classic Roald Dahl's books will be keeping the author's original text in print. It follows criticism of recent editing of his work to remove potentially so-called offensive language. It's understood Puffin will continue with the publication of amended texts as well as releasing the originals. Camilla, the Queen Consort, yesterday urged authors to resist curbs on freedom of expression. And it's official. 3 candidates are now running to become the next SNP leader. Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan all secured enough votes to advance to the next round of the leadership contest. They managed to secure the backing of at least 100 members from a minimum of 20 local branches. A period of campaigning now gets underway, with the winner to be announced on the 27th of March. Those are the latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
All right, people. Now, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, will make a speech at the UN Security Council in New York a little later this afternoon. We'll bring you that live here on GB News, you lucky people. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, though, is in New York for us. And, Darren, you're travelling with the Foreign Secretary, so what's he hoping to achieve? What have you got for us?
Yeah, very good afternoon to you, Patrick. Live inside the United Nations. As you say, James Cleverly is here at a special meeting of the UN Security Council, 1 year on from the invasion of Ukraine. He actually met just beforehand with the Ukrainian foreign minister here in the UN. We were kind of at the sidelines of that meeting, and that's been reflected, hasn't it? The kind of UK support for Ukraine. We had a tweet from Vladimir Zelenskyy, the Ukrainian president, in the last hour or so as well, again thanking Britain for its support. But James Cleverly's main role here, if you like, in many ways is trying to hold together the international coalition across the world, condemning Russia for its actions in Ukraine and trying to bring the fighting to an end. Now, the reason I say that it is a broad coalition, we had a vote here at the UN last night in which 141 nations from around the world essentially condemned Russia for its actions and indeed call for an end to the fighting. Now, that was a similar number of countries who'd done or had taken part in the vote this time last year. Only 7 this time supported Russia, and the Foreign Secretary is pretty pleased with that, because there was concern, as you've been reflecting, actually 1 year on into this conflict, as people kind of turn to other things or get concerned about how long it may well continue, that international coalition might well break down. And there is little sign of that, and little sign given the fact that Russia has spent an awful lot of the last couple of months going around to different parts of the world, most notably sub-Saharan Africa, trying to get countries on side. And in the end, they have failed in that task. Only Mali and Eritrea voted with Russia yesterday. So it's a flying visit. The Foreign Secretary is leaving later on today. I'm heading back with him, but his effort is not just a symbolic a symbolic kind of attempt to stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity with Ukraine. He's going to talk, as you say, at the UN Security Council meeting in the next couple of minutes, but also to try and convince those kind of Western allies to go further when it comes to the supply of aid and more particularly ammunitions in the weeks ahead, with fears that there could be a second offensive, UK calling for those longer range missiles, and also suggesting, one of very few countries in the world to do so, that the supply of jets should not be off the table.
Well, Darren, thank you very much, Darren McCaffrey, and we will be going back to New York in, well, however long it takes for James Cleverly to grace us with his presence there. But returning now to Putin's war in Ukraine, many are wondering what Russian leaders' ultimate aim is. What's Putin's end game? OK, now, having launched the war this time last year, many people expected Kiev to fall within weeks. But it turned out very differently, didn't it? So what are Putin's strategic aims for 2023? And this really ties into something that I think is a core theme in the inbox and a big one for you guys. A lot of you think that we should just keep ploughing infinite resources and money, etc., 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 into Ukraine so that we stop Putin in his tracks, because if we don't stop him at Ukraine, then in a lot of people's view, he'll just roll on all the way through Europe, and before we know it, he'll be at Calais, and then we all know it's only a short boat ride there into Dover, isn't it? But what are Putin's main aims? With me now is Martin Whittock, who's a historian who's written extensively about the Russians and the Soviet Union. Martin, is there any truth to the idea that Putin would take Ukraine and then just keep on going through Europe?
No. For the simple reason that, A, he doesn't have the capability of doing that. We've seen the degrading of the Russian military to quite extraordinary degree since February 2022. He simply can't do that. He hasn't got the strength or the capability of doing that. But secondly, I don't think this war ever started off with that aim. This is not in any way apologising for Putin. It's not in any way reducing the threat posed. But Putin's aim is not world domination. His aim is to restore what he considers lost Russian lands. That's why he intervened so brutally in Chechnya a few years ago, in Georgia, because he felt that was in his sphere of influence. That's why he has attempted to draw Ukraine back into Russia. He doesn't regard Ukraine as being a legitimate independent state. That's why he's a threat to places like Transnistria, for example, which is between Ukraine and Moldova, which is why he's putting pressure on the Baltic states. But I don't think for a moment his aim ever was, even when he thought he was going to succeed in 2022, to have world domination. No, that's simply beyond his capability. It's beyond the capability of Russia. It's threatening enough that he thinks he can invade a sovereign state in order to recreate lost what would be called the Ruski Mir, the world of Russia. But I don't think world domination is there.
So you think that the argument as to whether or not we should continue to send billions of pounds worth of resources and military equipment and money and all of this stuff to Ukraine should just be centred around the fact that we should stand up for Ukraine as a nation, not if we don't do that, we're next?
Very good question. I mean, I think twofold answer to that, really. One, I think because we can't be sure. I mean, I may be wrong, and people severely underestimated the threat of Hitler in the 30s. And even if Putin's aim is not world domination, we cannot see the disintegration of Eastern Europe because of the complete imbalance to the balance of power that would cause. But also because of the signal that sends to other people. Because even if his aim primarily is to cause trouble in the Baltics, but not to invade them, not to invade Poland, but to seize back Ukraine by force, if we let him get away with that, what kind of signal does that send China over Taiwan, for example? And how could that explode? So even if we don't think he is a direct threat, he's not going to invade Germany, he's not going to invade France, he's not going to cross the Channel, that still is a threat to the balance of power. That still is a threat to the rules-based international order. Even the reduced concept of the threat of Putin is bad enough. And we have to defend the rules-based international order. We have to make it clear that you cannot violate national sovereignty at will. Otherwise, is it Taiwan next for China? So even at that reduced threat, it's a big enough threat, I believe, to justify the continued investment and the standing foursquare with Ukraine. That's my position.
No, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to have. And actually, I think it's a much-needed intervention in this whole discourse, which is that I do find it a little bit probably hyperbolic for people to go, well, look, Putin, if we don't stop Putin now, then he will steamroll his way through Europe, because there doesn't really appear to be too much evidence that will take. The argument is strong enough that we should be doing what we're doing in Ukraine as it is, to protect national sovereignty, for the humanitarian issues and just for the fact, really, that no one really should be able to get away with doing what Putin's done, raining bombs down and genocide that's taken place, etc. You know, that argument is strong enough, and I'm quite glad that you said that, really, because I think for far too long it's this added thing about... And I don't want it to end up getting to a situation where the British public in 10 years' time are still paying this amount of money and they go, well, if we don't continue to do it, then you'll be next, when actually I'm not sure that's 100% true. But Martin, thank you very much. Martin Whittick there is a historian who's written extensively about Russia and the Soviet Union as well. So that's his view. Now, plenty of people might disagree. Plenty of people might be saying, well, I think that Putin would continue. And also, he made the point there, didn't he, that people tried to appease Hitler. That didn't exactly work, did it? And on top of that as well, how can you ever know what Vladimir Putin is really thinking if the guy is actually quite unhinged? But the West has spent tens of billions of pounds supporting Ukraine in the last 12 months. But what else could stop Vladimir Putin? And this is very much Vladimir Putin's war. He doesn't want to negotiate, apparently. He isn't going to withdraw. This is going to drag on and on and on. So I was just wondering whether or not there was a different solution and whether or not that solution is for Putin to be assassinated in an attempt to bring the war to an end. And joining me now is international security specialist, Will Geddes. Will, how difficult would it be to assassinate Putin?
Incredibly difficult, Patrick. I mean, bearing in mind that there have already been a number of plots which have been thwarted and foiled of trying to take him out, and these have been quite well-funded operations, both privately and unofficially, possibly, allegedly, by governments. But certainly to remove him, there's almost a question of, certainly from the intelligence sources I've spoken to, that even if you cut the head off of Putin, that is a hydra. There are many other heads which will emerge, and within his sort of immediate cabinet, there are other individuals that could step into the breach. And fundamentally, where we are right now, and I'd agree with Martin Whittick's assessments wholeheartedly, but to add to that, I think that one has to look at the dynamic of negotiations, the dynamic of conceding this particular conflict. And for Putin to simply walk away like a scolded puppy, having had himself sort of served by the Western forces, obviously in support of Ukraine, would be an unacceptable concession, I think, in his mind.
Putin has got absolute form for assassinating people, whether it's over here or in other parts of the world. What are the chances that one of his own decides to assassinate him? Somebody in Russia goes, look, I've had enough of this now. Hundreds of thousands of Russians are dying. You've gone mental. I'm going to bump you off.
Well, I think if one of his own is only if they're going to be turned. And I mean, in the traditional sort of methodology that allegedly the Putin friendlies have been using against dissenters to Putin, which is to use either gravity, fire or water as a means of obviously disposing of them. Certainly there's been a number of other suicides of high-profile Russian businessmen. That is why a large majority have now migrated down to the UAE, taking a lot of their money with them to provide or sanction some security. Now, there have been rumours and discussions of some of those individuals that have collaborated together to try and finance an operation to turn individuals within Putin's inner circle to try and bring them on board to potentially disrupt Putin in some shape or form. And that's not to say the technology isn't available to be able to do so, but it's getting close to him. And from certainly the outset of this conflict, Putin, I think, was aware that he could be a target for assassination, and he has really secured his circle to make sure no one can get to him that easily.
Yeah, indeed. Well, just talk to me a little bit about that, because even if the West wanted to, it would presumably be quite hard to actually get to Putin, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest challenge. I mean, every government around the world has a capability. You know, the Americans have the special activities division. We have allegedly the increment, or E Squadron, as it's otherwise known. Various other governments have that capability, that there is a skill set and tradecraft to carrying out these types of activities. But to be honest, there is also a large proportion of human intelligence, which is absolutely essential. And if you can break, or you can cultivate, or you can recruit an individual closest to the target, the subject of interest, or the subject to be assassinated, then you've got a greater chance. But it's going to be very difficult with Putin.
Do you think that Western leaders right now will actually be wondering how they can assassinate Putin?
I think it would certainly be something that hasn't been off the table. We certainly know of some clandestine and covert operations that have been running across the border in Russia, which have been disruptive. So, you know, some of these operations haven't been exclusive to Ukraine soil. Some have actually travelled further off. Whether they be Ukraine agents that have been trained by Western, again, we don't know. We can only speculate. But certainly there are attacks which are being taken really into the heartland of Russia.
And frankly, your view is that even if Putin was assassinated, that someone else might just pop up who was what, the same as him, or...?
I think, or even potentially worse. I mean, there are some real staunch allies of Putin there, and I think the question that it's a little bit like, you know, indifferent to other dictators around the world. You know, that dictator may be a figurehead. It doesn't mean that they don't wield a lot of power, but there are others in the sidelines that could be equally
So what I'm getting at there is if Putin was slotted, you don't think that it means the war would end?
I don't think it would.
OK.
Simple answer.
All right, Will, thank you very much. As ever, Will Geddes there is an international security specialist, just looking at, well, frankly, something that a lot of people have been talking about. It's just basically, if Putin goes, then would it all stop? And, yes, a mixed bag there. Let's take a look at the latest GB News People's Poll, shall we? Yes, it's Friday, it's poll time, ladies and gentlemen, and this week we asked whether they think the UK should continue to provide military aid to Ukraine. It's topical. It's almost like we planned these polls, isn't it? Of course, 1 year on from that Russian invasion of Ukraine starting, and a big majority of people are in favour of us continuing aid to Ukraine, military aid to Ukraine. 66% of people said they either support or strongly support the UK government helping to arm Ukraine, and just 8% of people opposed or strongly opposed the government's programme. Well, to put it into a bit of context, the UK provided 2.3 billion quid's worth of military aid to Ukraine in 2022, and this afternoon I want to hear from you. Well, any views welcome, and indeed I'm getting a lot of them. Again, I cannot emphasise how much of a mixed bag it is. I can only genuinely think that I'm doing something right here by having these discussions, because I've never before done a topic where every email, one after the other, is the polar opposite view. You know, we've got here, I'm a big fan of yours, Patrick, but you're wrong about this. You seem to be thinking that we should just leave Ukraine to Russia. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying, but I am floating the idea of how long do we continue? Can we afford to prop up Ukraine? You know, there's a lot of other countries out there. We're the second biggest when it comes to military and financial aid. And then there's a lot of people, saying that Putin is the new Hitler, for example. But then other people here just saying, well, actually, frankly, Patrick, we've got one here from Anne. Anne says, Patrick, you know, I believe that charity starts at home. That's not an uncommon view either. So, yes, I want to hear from you whether or not you think that we should continue to spend money on Ukraine, whether or not it could be better spent on the NHS, should it be used to help the millions of families who are struggling with the cost of living crisis, or, as is a common view, of course, the idea that if we don't stop Putin, then he'll just carry straight on, and we have a moral obligation and a moral duty to our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. Just on that, actually, a little bit later on, I'm going to be talking about the Ukrainian refugee scheme, because we took in loads of people, didn't we? And the right thing to do, of course. But what I find fascinating is that whenever you open Twitter, there seems to be a massive debate about whether or not people are more comfortable having Ukrainian refugees than they are other types of refugees, people coming over the channel, etc. So we're going to be opening up that can of worms a bit later on, and that's why. What is that? Councils now, as we covered earlier on in the week, are spending millions and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money either building new accommodation or buying accommodation for people who have either come from Afghanistan or from Ukraine. And it has opened up a big debate for people about, frankly, who they prefer when it comes to that stuff and what the reasons are behind that. A lot of people, of course, are being called racist, etc. So we'll talk a lot about that. It's a big talking point. But a little later this hour, we're going to be hearing from Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. He's going to give a speech at the UN Security Council. But after the break, I've got a major development. Oh, yes, this is good. A major development, actually. Following our brilliant documentary on grooming gangs, I will see you in just a couple of minutes. You're not going to want to miss that. Stay tuned, OK?
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's cross live now, you lucky people, to the UN Security Council in New York, where the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly is talking.
But they would keep calm and carry on. Dmytro kept his promise to me, and all of us in this chamber today need to keep our promise to Ukraine and keep our promise to the world to protect and defend the UN Charter. Over the past year, Putin has shown that he is willing to wage a war of attrition. And the 20th century's two world wars have shown us what a horror that would be. Hundreds of thousands more dead and wounded. Global shortages of food and fuel. Skyrocketing prices. For these reasons and many more, Putin cannot, must not win in Ukraine. Because what's at stake on the battlefields is the international order itself. And that is at the heart of the United Nations. The UN Charter, territorial integrity, international law. These things exist to protect countries that do not themselves have big and powerful armies. And it is to protect them from the aggression of those countries that do. At the end of the Second World War, the United Nations saw a unique thing in human history. Powerful, victorious nations chose to limit their own power to protect the countries less powerful than themselves. And that is the bottom line. That is why the UN Charter needs to be protected and it needs to be enforced. And it is why 3/4 of the entire membership of the United Nations have repeatedly voted to condemn this invasion in the General Assembly. But President Putin ignores the will of the United Nations. He doesn't care about the UN Charter. On the 24th of February last year, he told us that it was not Russia's plan to occupy Ukrainian territory. On the 8th of December, he called his illegal so-called annexations a significant result for Russia. His land grabs in eastern and southern Ukraine show us that his heart is set on imperial expansion. But 800 Russian soldiers a day are dying for his hopeless ambitions. They are paying for his ego with their lives. As he sees that his aggression against Ukraine is failing, we should expect him to try and strong-arm us into backing down, with every dirty, coercive instrument at his disposal, with cuts to grain and energy shipments, with threats of escalation, with poisonous disinformation, and with cyber attacks. And we must be prepared for this. And we must recognise that these things are a sign of weakness rather than a sign of strength. Those of us in this chamber have a special responsibility to the UN Charter, and we cannot allow Putin's invasion or his threats to succeed. We must not deviate from our resolve. And the UK is proud of the support that we have given Ukraine. But military assistance and humanitarian aid are not enough. Because when this war is over, and it will be over with Ukraine's successful defense of its territory, we must never allow Ukraine again to be left vulnerable to attack. We must make sure that Ukraine is safe and secure and economically viable. And that is why the UK is proud to co-host the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London in June of this year. Together, we must mobilise the combined might of the public and private finance to ensure that Ukraine gets the reconstruction investment that it needs. But what Ukraine wants, what we all want, is for this war to end now, and to end with a victory for Ukraine and a just and enduring peace based upon the UN Charter, because only this can bring an end to the food and fuel shortages that the whole world is suffering from. 1 year on, 1 year into this terrible, terrible war, let us in this chamber send a clear message. Our support for Ukraine is not and will never be time limited. Our defence of the UN Charter is not and will never be time limited. We will keep the promises that we made to the UN Charter and to the Ukrainian people. And we will give the Ukrainians the help that they need for as long as it takes until Ukraine prevails, until its sovereignty and territorial integrity is restored, and until this charter of this organisation is upheld. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Cleverly, for his statement.
OK, all right. So that was James Cleverly there, our Foreign Secretary, just talking at the UN Security Council in New York. He was one of several people who've been talking. Look, just to summarise, really, he says that we will not stop in our support for Ukraine until Ukraine is safe, secure and economically viable. So doubling, tripling down, really, on our commitment to Ukraine. Right, now, coming up, OK, we're going to get stuck into one of the fiercest debates that there is. Who's the worst? Who's the biggest menace? Cyclists or drivers? I am also going to have an update for you on the Grooming gang documentary that we had. We've got a big development in that. I promised you that before we were interrupted by James Cleverly, weren't we? So there we go. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thanks very much indeed. The top stories this hour on GB News. Well, this morning, a minute's silence was held across the UK, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. People stood silent all over London, and at Downing Street, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, reflecting on the country's losses. Britain has, meanwhile, imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. And in Kyiv, UK's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the last 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died following Russia's invasion, which has resulted in the largest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. Now, in other news today, police in Northern Ireland say they're treating the shooting of an officer in Omagh as terrorist-related, with the new IRA their main line of inquiry. Stormont says it's united in standing with the Northern Ireland Police Service after Wednesday's shooting. The man who was shot, Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell, remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital after being shot by 2 masked gunmen at a sports centre. His injuries are said to be life-changing. A 4th man has been arrested in connection with his attempted murder. And 3 candidates are now running to become the next SNP leader. Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan all secured enough votes to advance to the next round of the leadership contest. They managed to secure the backing of at least 100 members from a minimum of 20 local branches. A period of campaigning now gets underway, with the winner announced on the 27th of March. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back at 5.
OK, yes, thank you very much, Polly. Now, a GB News Investigates exclusive last month revealed that a former Rotherham councillor implicated in the town's failures over its grooming gang scandal had shockingly been hired by the NHS as, couple load of this, a diversity manager. Yes, GB News Investigates reporter Charlie Peters joins me now with an update on that story. Go on.
So, it's under review. The NHS has finally announced that they've launched an independent review into the hiring of Mr Hussain after GB News Investigates raised this issue with them last month. Now, to remind the viewers of the origin of the story here, Maruf Hussain was a councillor in Rotherham from the early noughties up to 2015 when he resigned in disgrace from the Cabinet after a report into the council found that it was in denial over the extent of the town's grooming gangs scandal. We knew at the time that some 1,400 girls had been abused from 1997 to 2013, a period when Maruf Hussain was in charge. In fact, he was the Community Cohesion Minister for much of that time, and the Casey report into the council found that he was covering up the issue. It alleged that he had pushed back and suppressed discussion of the gangs, and he even, it was said, made a false allegation of racism against a fellow Labour councillor in order to suppress discussion. So he resigned in disgrace. He even denied the report as he was resigning. Several years passed, and in 2020 he snuck back into the public sector, working for the NHS for a body called Health Education England as the West Midlands Diversity and Inclusion Participation Manager, equality and diversity job, which is an extraordinary title to have, considering his past involvement in suppressing discussion.
Anyway, really, but yes, especially,
especially because he had been in charge of, as one survivor told me, prioritising, in their view, prioritising community cohesion over the security and the sanctity of the girls in that town. Not only was he given that West Midlands role, but 2 years later, last year, he was promoted to become the national lead for Health Education England in this inclusion and diversity role. Well, GB News Investigates ran the story last month, and finally, a month later, the NHS have announced that they've put him under review and they're investigating the cause. They won't say how long this investigation is going to take. They're not saying who's running it, and they haven't even told us if Mr Hussain has been suspended while it's conducted. But I can't imagine he's doing a lot of diversity and inclusion work right now while the spotlight is on him.
No, well, you'd probably hope not, really, I think, in result to this. I mean, so essentially, just in a nutshell, really, you know, this particular chap managed to, there was clearly no background check done? I mean, there must have been some kind of background check done and nothing flagged up.
Well, I mean, if you search the name, there is so much there. In fact, but the thing is, he went through a desperate attempt to reinvent himself after the 2015 scandal. He actually started working as an anti-Islamophobia activist for a long time. And he even gave a talk to West Yorkshire Police some years back, advising them on Islamophobia, which means have a remarkable situation where a man who suppressed discussion with the police in South Yorkshire during the grooming gang scandal was advising West Yorkshire Police on how to deal with racism. This is clearly, as many are saying, not the right link for somebody of his background to have taken. Now, after GB News ran the story last month, plenty of other people obviously complained to the NHS. Many of our viewers even submitted complaints. And the network of Sikh organisations also submitted a significant complaint, and its director, Lord Singh of Wimbledon, who's a significant Sikh figure in Britain, told GB News yesterday that he was appalled by the decision and hoped that the investigation ends with Mr Hussain being kicked out of the NHS.
And just to remind people as well who maybe didn't see it first time round, there is a film, really, that you've put together for us, haven't you? And people can watch that on YouTube and online?
Yeah, on the GB News app and on YouTube. It's called Grooming Gangs, Britain's Shame.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, thank you very, very much. Now, I do have a statement here. NHS England has released the following statement. As a result of the issues that have been raised, HEE has commissioned an independently led review to establish the circumstances and inform next steps. Until the review is complete, HEE is not in position to comment on individual matters. So there we go. Right, OK, we're moving on from that knowledge judgment. Thank you very much, Charlie, by the way. Charlie Peters there. Are you offended by the word fireman? No. OK, good. Well, I think we can get that out of the way. But the Chief Fire Officer at Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service is. He says that it has sexist connotations. Yeah, you would be right in thinking that is the same fire service that absolutely copped it in terms of their response to the Manchester Arena bombing. So priorities much, anyone? Priorities much. But yes, the word fireman now is deeply offensive and it must be banned. We'll be talking about all of this very shortly.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Right, here we go. Sadiq Khan has got plenty of critics. But even I didn't see this one coming. The legendary actress Joan Collins has urged the London mayor to do something about cyclists after one allegedly crashed into her. So it comes after the TV presenter Dan Walker was knocked off his bike and injured while he was hit by a car earlier this week. And just this morning, Boris Johnson's father, Stanley Johnson, caused uproar after suggesting that cyclists don't need to wear high-vis or helmets. So, who is to blame for the growing number of disputes between car drivers and cyclists? Who's the biggest menace on the road? And the emails have been coming in thick and fast in this. Some of them, I must say, absolutely hilarious, by the way, so I'll be going to those shortly. But Robert Bull, the chairman-elect of the Alliance of British Drivers, and Casper Hughes from the Stop Killing Cyclists campaign are, I believe, about to have an epic row. Robert, I'll start with you, just purely for the only reason that your name is first on the auto cue. The chairman-elect of the Alliance of British Drivers. Who's a bigger menace, drivers or cyclists?
Well, I know you want a row, but I'm not sure we're going to have one.
Right, get him off.
Both of them have some rights.
Go on, carry on.
I think both of them have some rights on the road. I think the problem that motorists view is that they don't typically pay much for it. They should get more careful. And I think personally, they should wear helmets and they should wear visibility jackets. I mean, it's a sensible thing to do, isn't it, if you want to save your own life?
OK, well, Casper, I will paraphrase very much what's been said there, which is that, you know, you're all on the take, you don't pay any road tax and you don't protect yourselves.
We do pay, well, no, we don't pay road tax because that's been abolished. Churchill abolished that in 1937. There's vehicle excise duty now, which electric vehicles don't pay either. And bikes do, 1/17,000th of the damage to road wear that cars do. So, actually, if for every mile cycled, it adds 50p to the economy. For every mile driven, it takes £1 away from the economy.
OK, I'm obviously going to have to ask you to push back on that a little bit. Casper, how does it add 50p to the economy if someone cycles for a mile, Casper?
Or how does it cost £1 to the economy for every mile that's driven? Should we start there instead? Noise pollution costs £20 billion a year, which the majority of which comes from cars, emissions, pollution, inactivity disease costs £6 billion
Casper,
a year.
To be fair, Casper, that bit was quite obvious. I'm just intrigued to know about why it adds 50p. I get the damage that cars do, right? No one's disputing that cars cause pollution. But what's the 50p added to the economy from cycling?
Oh, it's because obviously there is no pollution. They improve people's health, they improve people's mental health, which in turn has a hugely positive effect on the workforce of this country.
OK. I think we've made that up, haven't we? But there we go. Robert, OK, go on. You respond to that?
No, we haven't made that up.
Well, I mean, I've never heard quite so much rubbish. Basically, you need to look at what makes this country work. And that is that 85% of commuters use cars. Therefore, we should be spending money in the place where people are choosing to travel. Tremendous amount of money spent on cycling, and half the time they don't even use the cycleways anyway. Now, I don't live in London, thank goodness, and so I'm not sure that I'm right to comment on the actual London part. But certainly down here in Bristol and that local area, the level of cycling is extremely low, and why so much money is spent on providing them with facilities, which often they don't use anyway. They more likely seem to cycle in the road than on their own sort of cycleways. So I don't understand all the money bit. I mean, that's just crazy. I don't understand how cars can cost that. If you took them all off the road, the country would come to a stop. I mean, how can you say that they're costing the country money?
Are cyclists, Casper, arguably more of a threat to pedestrians cycling on pavements or doing things like that?
No, they're not. Everybody that's been killed on the pavement for the last 15 years has been killed by a driver. But actually, just going to what he's talking about, going to what Robert's talking about here, the cycling infrastructure is a tiny, minuscule proportion of the transport budget that the government spends in this country. In fact, we've been campaigning for it to be 20% of the transport budget, which is what the UN has said in 2016 it should be. Because Robert makes a really good point there. People choose to drive because it's convenient, and they don't choose to cycle because it's not safe. And if you make public transport and active transport convenient and safe, people will get out of their cars. And of course, transport is the largest emitting sector with regard to emissions. It's a driver of climate change, and we need to get people out of their cars and onto safe, active and public transport.
I do appreciate...
It's difficult making that argument once all cars are electric, aren't you?
Go on, expand on
that.
At all,
because of the embedded emissions in cars. It's 12 tonnes of embedded emissions in a car. Over its lifetime, it would equate to around about 70% of our allocated emissions if we were to agree to our Paris Agreement obligations.
Robert, do you just find cyclists quite annoying when they're all there with the GoPros and the Lycra and they're cycling 3 abreast on a country lane?
I think annoying, again, is wrong. It can be frustrating. They do seem to sometimes make an attempt to block cars, particularly on country roads. I mean, my son's an avid cyclist, and I'm not against cycling at all. But I do think that they have their own responsibility, which they should be taking. And certainly cycling, particularly in the dark, without any lights or anything that reflects off of car headlights, seems to be a crazy thing to me.
Now, look, I get what you're saying, Casper, about the potential nuance of... You said that no one had been killed on a pavement by a cyclist, I think you said, for the last 15 years. I did just quickly Google pedestrian killed by cyclist, and, I mean, West Lothian pedestrian, cyclist who killed a pedestrian in London, jailed. So, I mean, there are jumped red lights. And it's on that one, actually.
They weren't on pavements.
OK, very
You said on pavements, so they weren't on pavements. And, you know, if you want to go down that route, then of the 1,700 people killed a year by drivers, drivers kill and maim every, 5 people a day are killed by drivers.
Yes.
It's just a total nonsense argument that...
OK. I haven't made the argument yet because I haven't been able to ask a question. I was going to ask the question, should cyclists have number plates so that we can more clearly identify them?
Yes.
Well...
OK, so you think yes.
Every day in London, there's 5 hit and runs by drivers. They don't. A lot of them get away. They've got number plates on there. We're all identifiable because we're all unique. There's no reason at all to impose. And anyway, the DFT have said it would be absolutely an administrative nightmare and not cost effective remotely.
Robert, would it make you feel better as, the chairman-elect of the Alliance for British Drivers, when you're driving around and there's cycle lanes, etc., or a pedestrian even, if you knew that all cyclists were clearly identifiable by a number plate, do you think that's something that would make you feel safer?
Well, it wouldn't make me feel any safer. It might make them feel safer. But I think it's not a question of safety in the car. We have to take account of cyclists. I accept that. You have to give them space and all those things. But if you can't see them, I mean, if this action is on whether you can see them, then why on earth do they not wear bright clothing that you can see? I mean, this is cropped up, I think, from Dan Walker. And from what I've seen in the videos, he just had dark clothing on. And he also put himself in a very vulnerable position on a roundabout. But, as I say, I can't talk for London cycling because I wouldn't go to London.
OK. Just very finally, both of you, I think the answers to this are going to be rather predictable, but we'll have it nonetheless. Casper, who's worse in terms of road rage? Is it cyclists or drivers? Casper?
Road rage? If road rage leads to killed or seriously injured, then proportionally you would have to say that drivers are. But I'm not. Actually, having listened to what Robert said, I think actually there's loads and loads of common ground here. Like Robert's saying, his son's a cyclist. I'm a driver. I've worked in transport. I've got a YTS in car mechanics. Right. We all need to be. It's not a case of sharing the road here, but we all need to take responsibility and proportional responsibility for the vehicles that we're driving.
OK, Robert, same question to you, and we'll round this off. Do you think that sometimes cyclists are a bit aggy, or actually do drivers get very wound up by them and toot their horn and scare them?
Well, I think if they don't like tooting their horn and scaring them, I think if they deliberately block you from going past, then I think that's a problem. Not many of them do that, admittedly, but when they do it is a problem. But as I say, I think my main bone of contention would be that they're driving around or riding around with dark clothes. As the summer comes on, it won't be so bad. But in the winter nights, it's very difficult.
All right, both of you, I must say I've thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you very, very much. I'd hope to get you both back on again soon. That's Robert Bull there, the chairman-elect of the Alliance of British Drivers, and Casper Hughes from Stop Killing Cyclists. Just doing some way there to put the side up for who's a bigger menace in light of the fact that maybe cyclists will have to wear helmets and high vis, and potentially drivers could do a little bit more to, not hurt them, I suppose. Right, moving on. Greater Manchester's Chief Fire Officer Dave Russell has said that the word fireman is sexist and exclusionary, and the fire chief believes that the language minimises or overlooks the vital role anyone can play. I'm going to bring in now the editor of Spiked. It's Tom Slater. Tom, thank you very much. Now, good afternoon. If you were a fireman, would you be going around offending people with the name, do you think? Would you change it to fire them or fire person?
Maybe that's the way forward. Fire thing. I don't know where we're up to with this at this point. I mean, this individual, Dave Russell, I'm sure he was, serving on the front line at one point. I've got enormous respect for firefighters, but I can imagine most of the people who work under him think this is absolutely ridiculous. This is the sort of thing that we used to talk about coming out of a student union, and yet it seems like it's spilled into all layers of society. I get that since the 1980s, officially, the fire service have referred to firefighters because there are women firefighters, about 8% of the total at this point. But what he was doing in this story, it's fascinating, was sending an email around to his staff and basically castigating them for using the phrase casually. He said that we employ firefighters, not firemen, and haven't for decades, so why use the term, is a quote. And he said that it needs to stop, and that the term, this is a quote, permanently erased from our vocabulary. So it's just such a ridiculous overreaction, but it just shows that more and more institutions seem to have people like this in them.
Yeah, can I also just raise the point about the Greater Manchester Fire Brigade as well, that they were absolutely slammed in a inquest into the Manchester Arena bombing because it took them rather a long time to actually get anyone in because they were too, quotes, risk-averse. So the argument could be, Tom, that maybe they should focus more on doing their job as opposed to whether or not the term fireman is offensive.
Well, this is something that we see across the board. You're talking there, of course, about the horrendous failings that have been laid at the feet of Greater Manchester Police. I mean, we see things like this, initiatives like this cropping up in the police, rather than the fire service, all the time. For instance, many of our kind of different kind of police officers across the country have come under sustained criticism for their mishandling of cases, horrendous cases that we've all heard about that we don't want to discuss again on a Friday afternoon. And yet at the same time, they're spending all of time, money, doing their squad cars up in rainbow colours. This is something that we see time and time again. I think it does speak to what priorities. The other thing I think it speaks to, particularly with this case, is this willingness and this celebration of employers effectively policing the speech of their employees. And that's where this does get a bit more serious. This is something that we're starting to see time and time again, where you have these codes, which on the surface are quite ridiculous, but if you don't stick to them, you could find yourself in trouble, whether it often in the form of pronouns, less so in the form of this kind of more gender-neutral language. That's not something that I think we should be comfortable with, I don't think.
Yeah, and they say, well, what do you want to grow up to be? And you ask those kids at primary school, OK, and they go, fireman. And in the case of David on the Isle of Wight, who's been in touch, he says that he was at a school recently, and he says that a teacher piped up. He does road safety classes at schools, and he said that he said, what do you want to be? And the kid said fireman, and the teacher said, no, it's a gender-neutral school, we say firefighter. And then he said he went to another school, and they said you can't call them firefighter, it's too aggressive, it's fire personnel. And at what point do we push back on this? Otherwise, the greatest football team in the world, Tom, Manchester United, is going to become People-Chester United.
Well, it feels like it's going this way, doesn't it? I mean, it's so utterly ridiculous. And the problem is that there's also a serious edge to it as well, which is that this is just the more easily mockable end of this compulsion that people have to try and rewrite language, to try and cleanse it of anything upsetting. This weird idea that we're so robotic that if we pick up the wrong idea, even implicitly from a term like firefighter or firemen rather than firefighter, we're going to become some sort of terrible bigot. It is ridiculous, but it's kind of the thin end of a culture which wants language to be cleansed and sanitised, and that is something that we should be worried about.
Look, thank you very much. I always appreciate our chats, Tom. Look after yourself. Tom Slater there, who's, of course, the editor of Spike. Make sure you check out Spike because it is full of good stuff like that conversation that we've just had there. Now, loads of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts as well. On our main topic of the day, of course, it's a year to the day since Putin rolled the tanks into Ukraine, isn't it? I've been asking you, at what point do you think that we should... No, let me rephrase that. How much longer can we actually keep helping Ukraine for in terms of the cost, etc., if this war is going to end in stalemate, OK? Susie says we need to support Ukraine until they have won the battle. If we walk away, this sends a message to Putin that the West do not care what he does, and this will give him carte blanche to carry on. Yes, this is how World War III started. This is what someone else is saying. Carol, yes, so a lot of that going about. But there are a couple of other views as well. Quite a few people there saying, well, actually, we've got problems of our own going on right here at home. So where do you stand on that? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, we are going to discuss our attitudes to Ukrainian refugees very shortly. Would you rather house a Ukrainian refugee or somebody coming across the channel? GBViews at gbnews.uk. And one of our reporters as well has been in the pub all afternoon. I know, fantastic. Anyway, there you go. We'll go to that shortly.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
All right, people, it's Friday, it's Patrick Christys, and we are live at 5. So let's go. It's exactly a year since Putin rolled the tanks in. Since then, this country has taken in over 150,000 Ukrainian refugees. Tens of thousands of channel migrants have also arrived in the UK over the last 12 months. Does the great British public have a different attitude towards those two groups of people? We're going to delve into that and ask why, if indeed they do. And 3 people have thrown their hat into the ring to become the new leader of the SNP. This hour, I'm going to find out all about their strengths, if they've got any. It'll be a short segment. And we're in talks as well to host a boxing match between Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson and Remainer protester Steve Bray. But look, the big question, ladies and gentlemen, and it's one that's been doing the rounds in the office, is should we go the whole hog and have ring girls? It's divided the office. Are boxing ring girls an affront to feminism? GB Views at gbnews.uk. How long should we support the war in Ukraine? Do you think we have different attitudes towards Ukrainian refugees and channel migrants? And if so, why? That's the kind of the big one that I want this hour. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Oh, yeah, and should we have ring girls? Up next, though, it's Polly Middlehurst with your news.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. A minute's silence was held today across the UK, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. People stood in silence across the UK. And outside Downing Street, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, reflecting on the country's losses. And today, Britain has imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia could use on a battlefield. And President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of staff and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. And in Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy attended a ceremony with families of soldiers who'd been killed in the conflict. He described the last 12 months as a year of pain and sorrow, but also faith and unity. Well, the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, spoke to GB News about the human cost of Russia's invasion.
Can you imagine that Ukraine lost dozens and dozens of thousands of the innocent civilians from Bucha to Mariupol, from the military criminal Putin. But together, can you imagine that 8 million Ukrainians leave Ukraine and go abroad? 2.5 million of Ukrainian children go to the school abroad because of your solidarity. But this is the humanitarian disaster.
Petro Poroshenko. Well, Poland has delivered its first Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine and says it's ready to supply more and quickly. The Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki also says the country will train Ukrainians on F-16 fighter jets. Sweden, too, is expected to deliver 10 of the tanks, as well as anti-aircraft systems. And today, a street in central London was renamed Kyiv Road to mark the first anniversary since Russian President Vladimir Putin sent his troops into Ukraine. Westminster City Council has given the name to a small section of the Bayswater Road, a short distance from the Russian embassy. The council saying it wants to show Ukrainian residents that their struggle has a visible place in our city. In other news today, police in Northern Ireland say they're treating the shooting of an officer in Omagh as a terrorist-related incident, with the terror group, the New IRA, the chief line of inquiry. Stormont says it's united in standing with the PSNI after Wednesday's shooting. And the man who was shot, Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell, remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital after being shot by 2 masked gunmen at a sports centre. His injuries are said to be life-threatening. A 4th man has been arrested in connection with his attempted murder, and Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle O'Neill described it as an attack on the entire community.
I think it's important that we continue to send a united message to wider society. We this year celebrate 25 years of our Good Friday Agreement, and so much that's been achieved over those past 25 years. Our society has been completely transformed, and we're not going to allow anybody to reverse any of that progress that's been made. So that's why it's very important that we do put across today that this is an attack on the community, this is an attack on all of us, and this is an attack that none of us will ever tolerate.
Junior doctors are to stage 3 days of strike action next month. The British Medical Association has announced they'll walk off the job from the 13th of March. Nearly 37,000 BMA members voted in favour of industrial action. That's the largest ever turnout for a ballot of doctors. And it follows a series of strikes by nurses and ambulance workers. The publishing house Puffin UK has announced that Roald Dahl's classic collection will still be printed using the author's original descriptions and expressions. It follows criticism of the recent editing of his work to remove potentially offensive language. It's understood Puffin UK will continue with the publication of amended texts, as well as continuing to release the original versions. Camilla, the Queen Consort, yesterday urged authors to resist curbs on their freedom of expression. And in Scotland, 3 candidates are now running to become the next SNP leader. Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan, all securing enough votes to advance to the next round of the leadership contest. They managed to secure the backing of at least 100 members from a minimum of 20 local branches. A period of campaigning now gets underway, with the winner announced on the 27th of March. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour.
OK, people, well, it is a year to the day since Vladimir Putin rolled the tanks into Ukraine. We've covered loads of different angles on it so far this show. Of course, when's the war going to end? We've covered our funding for the conflict as well, and compare that to how other countries have gone about it. Looking ahead as well, will Putin stop? We've assessed whether or not Putin can even be bumped off. But another angle to all of this is the refugee side of things. So since the start of the invasion of Ukraine, the UK has taken in more than 150,000 Ukrainian refugees, with many British people just opening their doors, welcoming people fleeing the bombs. However, with the government still struggling to get a handle on the Channel crisis, and with some on the left crying hypocrisy, is our attitude towards refugees racist? And I'm going to preface that by saying I've seen a lot of people piping up online saying that they seem to be very happy to take Ukrainian refugees in, not so much people coming across the Channel, people highlighting that maybe, just maybe, that makes people racist. So I wanted to have this chat because Dr. Ricky Bersan is a social policy analyst, and he joins me now. Thank you very much, Dr. Ricky. Is there more to it than straightforward racism? Would some people say that they feel that Ukrainian refugees, I don't know, are more deserving, or we have more in common with them culturally than some people coming over the Channel? What do you think it's all about?
Well, Patrick, there is that argument that many Brits may feel a certain social and cultural nearness to Ukrainians compared to other nationalities. But the key point that I'd make here is that when it comes to the ongoing small boats crisis, there are questions to be asked as to whether a notable portion of those crossing the English Channel into the UK are genuinely fleeing war. We know that a notable portion originate from Albania. Albania has not experienced conflict since the 1997 civil war. There was a recent report published by The Times which revealed that Indian nationals now represented the third largest cohort of those crossing the channel on small boats. India, also a country not at war. Of course, it has its problems with sectarian and communal tensions, but it is not experiencing conflict. So I think that what it is that we're very, very sure that Ukraine is currently participating in a conflict, but when it comes to those who are crossing the channel, they're originating from countries who are not involved in a conflict.
Yeah, and so in your view, people are perhaps. By the way, this is just a small section of society, of course, but some people are more welcoming of the idea of Ukrainian refugees, so a hotel full of Ukrainian refugees, say, as opposed to a hotel full of Channel migrants, and that, as far as you're concerned, has more down to the fact that we know they're genuine refugees as opposed to some of the people coming across the Channel. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, I think Patrick would also make the point, if you remember very clearly, that there was very strict controls over men not being allowed to leave Ukraine and to help with the military efforts, which meant that it was women and children who were leaving Ukraine. Now, if you compare that to the ongoing crisis involving small boats in the English Channel, that's predominantly consists of able-bodied young men. So I think that may well factor into people's willingness when it comes to rehoming particular groups of refugees.
I think that's actually really...
I'd make this point, Patrick, and that also means that they may well question the credibility of the claims that certain people are fleeing war and persecution.
No, I think that's a really, really interesting couple of points that you've made there, because there is the fact that we absolutely 100% know that people coming from Ukraine have got a war on and are fleeing the horrors of war. There is also, as you've said there as well, predominantly it's women and children, isn't it? Which I think naturally many people will be more sympathetic. Certainly when it comes to letting people into their own homes, Rakib, as well, which is another angle to this as well. The Ukrainian refugee scheme saw a lot of people take women and children into their own homes. And let's be honest, if we had a very similar setup when it came to people coming across the Channel, that would involve people taking young men into their own homes, wouldn't it? And is it any wonder that people might be more comfortable with the women and children?
Well, I mean, I think if you ask the average British family, would they be more comfortable with rehoming a woman and her child, or indeed children, compared to a single young male? I think that you know what the answer would be in most cases. So, and I think that would be a perfectly natural response as well. So when we're looking at this particular issue, of course, I do think social and cultural nearness, that may come into it. We also have to look at the demographic characteristics when it comes to Ukrainian refugees against those who are crossing the English Channel on small boats into the UK.
Do you think it could also be the potential short-termism of it? Now, I know that when the refugee scheme was first opened for Ukraine, it was very much billed as a temporary measure. Clearly, the war is rumbling on. In fact, there's no chance of that ending anytime soon. I think anyone who realistically thought that the war would be over in a couple of months was probably misguided anyway. So I do think that the majority of people who opened their doors to Ukrainian refugees probably had quite a good idea that they weren't just going to be there for a few months. But do you think the idea that the Ukrainians, it would appear anyway, the majority of them are quite keen to go back once everything has calmed down, might also add to people's willingness to let them in the short term, do you think, as opposed to maybe people who are desperate to settle here permanently?
Well, I think if there's the perception that many people who are crossing on the small boats into the UK are in fact economic migrants, then you'd have to question how willing would they be to return back to their country of origin in the future. Because usually economic migration tends to be a longer term endeavour. While with genuine refugees who have been forced out of their country, perhaps as a result of conflict, they may well have those aspirations to return to their homeland once that conflict has died down. And so I think that there's a variety of considerations at play. And I do think that when it comes to that, the considerations surrounding social and cultural nearness, I don't think that necessarily equates to racism. It's just the fact that we have a hot war on the continent of Europe, and British people may just feel that just relates to them in a closer way.
Well, yeah, and I'm wondering whether or not part of this is genuinely just something natural and human and would go for other cultures in other parts of the world. So what I mean by that is Ukraine tends to be, by and large, an Orthodox Christian community, so a denomination of Christianity by and large. And we are, as it still stands anyway, a Christian country, quotes unquote. Clearly, the vast majority of the demographics in Ukraine are mostly white, OK, and that still remains the case in this country. And do you think that there is just something psychological about that for the majority of the British indigenous population that maybe just subconsciously makes them more welcoming of people, do you think?
But that's also the argument that you can also make as to why neighbouring countries such as Poland should also do their fair share, which they have been. Because I do think cultural closeness and compatibility comes into it. And I just don't think that's a form of racism. I think that's a perfectly natural response to the situation. And as I said, you have to look at the demographic character when it comes to Ukrainian refugees versus those who are crossing on small boats into the English Channel. And that's naturally going to engender different responses when you're asking people to rehome newcomers in their own property.
Yeah, Rakib, I found that fascinating. Look, thank you very much. Always great to chat to you. Dr. Rakib Hassan there is a senior policy analyst. And I just wanted to drill down in this. Like I said, we've covered loads of different angles when it comes to the anniversary of the start of the war in Ukraine. We've done the military side of it. We've done the financial elements of it and all sorts of stuff, and Putin's future. I think one of the big elements of it, of course, is the Ukrainian resettlement scheme, the refugee scheme. And when we compare that as well with what's been going on in the channel, I thought there was an interesting chat to be had there. I hope you all found that interesting. Get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you feel more welcoming towards Ukrainian refugees? If that is the case, then why? If why not, obviously. Right, moving on there, slightly. Ukrainians from across Swindon are gathering at a bar in the town today. A local brewery is launching a special craft beer, which will raise money for charity. Now, joining me now, OK, is Jeff Moody. He's GB News' South West reporter. And, Jeff, I understand you've been in the pub for quite a while. What's it like?
I have, you know. I've been here since 10 o'clock this morning. I've been sampling this amazing Ukrainian beer. I'm about to have my second pint. Third pint. Hello. This is Andrew, the barman, who's been making me taste as many of these as possible all day. Thank you very much indeed for this. What makes this Ukrainian?
So it's the ingredients. We've got honey, sunflower, we've got rye malt and wheat, which are big exports of the Ukraine.
And what gave you the idea to brew a specific Ukrainian beer?
Well, we became aware of Sweden Welcomes Ukraine, and their committee drank in the bar. We got chatting, and the business community wanted to help, basically. So as part of the old-time business community here in Swindon, we wanted to give back. So raising money is a massive part of that for us, and Hop Kettle Breweries to give forward and raise awareness and help them continue their efforts.
Absolutely. Have you noticed everybody stopped talking? I've never managed to make a bar stop talking quite as quickly as that. But let's move on and talk to some other people in the bar. I want to talk to Vadim, first of all. Vadim, we've been sharing a few of these this afternoon. You've been here, you're from Ukraine, but you've been here 18 years. So you've been the advance party, and you were very much involved in welcoming Ukrainian refugees last year, weren't you? What sort of issues did they face when they came here, do you think? How were you able to help?
Well, I just want to say that when the war started, or this invasion started, we had the amazing response of the people of Swindon and obviously the whole country, helping in any way, shape and form possible, bringing stuff, sending stuff to Ukraine and so on and so forth. But then when the first people from Ukraine started to come, and they came even before the program was announced and before it started on the 18th of March. So there were some people who came in the very early days of March, for example. I was able to just post something on Facebook and see tens and hundreds, well, not hundreds, but many people actually saying, yes, I can welcome them, I'll be looking after them, without any promise to pay or anything. And then obviously it was about educating those who came about how this country works. If they came with children, how schooling works. If they needed some medical help, how the healthcare system works, and so on and so forth. And magic roundabout if they came by car, but they must have flew from Europe, yes.
OK, Vadim, thank you very much. Yeva, quick word with you. I mean, we've been drinking this afternoon and having a nice time, enjoying the atmosphere here. But obviously, this isn't a day for celebration, is it? How does today affect you emotionally, do you think?
I think this day is very emotional and very sad for many people, especially Ukrainians, because it affected them the mostly. But I also see all this situation as a test for humanity and how we react, how we act in situations like that, and seeing Swindon community uniting so nicely and helping and sharing all this love, opening doors for Ukrainians, I think it gives us hope that everything will be okay.
Hope, absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, I'm sensing a flavour here of the honey. I'm definitely getting a sense of the honey. And of the hops too. It's a good beer, Patrick. You should try it.
This is great. Jeff, you absolute legend. Right, Jeff Moody there. Thank you very much. And I believe that's Jeff's last live hit of the week. So get yourselves down to Swindon, ladies.
Ever, I think.
Ever? No, definitely not. If I had it my way, we'd do a lot more of those. Thank you very much. Jeff Moody there, who it's fair to say has been at a pub in Swindon for a while. But he is, of course, covering a very serious story, in a way. They've done a Ukrainian beer. You get the drift. Anyway, Jeff, absolutely spot on. Thank you very much, mate. Anyway, right, next, we are going to discuss who might be lucky enough to replace Nicola Sturgeon as the new pound shop braveheart, new leader of the SNP. I'll see you shortly.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I always love my viewers and my listeners because you never fail to deliver. I was asking you your views on what we led in this hour with, which is, do you think that we treat Ukrainian refugees differently to we treat other migrants? And Jan says there's a big difference because Ukrainians are coming here for safety, but some crossing the channel are economic migrants who have no intention of going back. I doubt that there's many who are running from something. Ukrainians are women and children, not men looking for work. And this is it, isn't it? I was getting quite annoyed, actually, by the usual types on Twitter who were all going, oh, well, if you would rather have a hotel full of Ukrainian refugees than people coming across the channel, then that makes you a racist. And then I thought, well, actually, no. Isn't it because a lot of the Ukrainians are women and children and the men have stayed to fight and they have every intention of going back one day, and there might be a variety of other different factors as well. Paul says, Ukrainian citizens are legitimate in their quest for a safe place to call a temporary home, a lot of whom are stating they would love to return to their homeland. Similar theme. Mark says, people were being paid £350 a month to rehome Ukrainians. I don't recall the government offering this for Syrians or Afghanis. I get the gist of what you're saying there, Mark. What I would say to that, though, is that the taxpayer wasn't asked at all about the, roughly speaking, £7 million a day that we are, of course, paying in terms of hotel costs, etc. So whilst people, individuals, might be being paid £350 a month, I've got a feeling that might have stopped now, but I'll double-check that. £350 a month to rehome Ukrainians. In a way, we're all paying, obviously, for the housing of everyone anyway, aren't we? So there is, of course, all of that. But get your views coming in, because I wanted to know whether or not you thought that it made a lot of people racist, the idea that they just maybe naturally or inherently prefer to have Ukrainian refugees and people coming across the channel. And it did stop and make me think about that. And then these arguments about, well, a lot of them we know, we can definitively point now to anyone who's coming out of Ukraine. We can look at and go, well, we absolutely know that you've come from a war zone, so there's that. The majority of them are women and children. And then on top of that, I do think there is something just inherently human, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but inherently human about if somebody shares the same, I would say maybe demographics as you by and large, but also as well, potentially the same similar religious beliefs and things like that. I think there's maybe just something unconscious there for a lot of people, not everyone, that just makes people maybe more inclined to be a bit more welcoming. I don't know, what do you think? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Interesting stuff. But nominations to become, we're going north of the border now, people, where interestingly there aren't actually that many migrant hotels. Who'd have thought that? But nominations to become Nicola Sturgeon's successor as leader of the SNP and Scotland's First Minister, well, they closed at midday. And the grand total of 3 people are now standing against each other. I hope what we are about to witness is, of course, the SNP just ripping itself apart, but there we go. Who are they? Kate Forbes. Kate Forbes is still running, despite the backlash, since she revealed that she would have voted against gay marriage legislation in 2014 if she'd been an MSP at the time. So she copped it for having bog-standard religious views there. She's up against Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf, who many see as the front-runner, and I think we could all agree a potential agent of chaos. And the third and final candidate is the former Community Safety Minister, Ash Regan, who formally launched her campaign earlier today, so a late entry there. Well, joining me now is a man with his finger on the pulse so much he performs open heart surgery on British politics. It's James Heal, who's been following the race very closely. He is also, of course, the diary editor at The Spectator. This guy is just an absolute political animal, aren't you, James? And wrote the book on Liz Truss as well, which is great stuff.
I did, and let's hope they last longer than her, whoever succeeds Sturgeon.
So they last longer than you. I can't help but notice the Daily Star have got a turnip on their front page today, not a lettuce. But, OK, right, so talk to me a bit about each candidate. So Kate Forbes, let's start with her before we gradually ease our way off to Humza Yousaf, where the good stuff happens. So Kate Forbes, she got in hot water for having religious views.
Yes, 32 years old, graduate of Cambridge. only elected a few years ago, but she's already seen the long heir apparent because she's impressed with her brief. She's someone perhaps on the right of the party, both for her social conservative views, which you've just talked about, but also she's someone who, we've suggested before, the Spectators, sort of Tarzan Thatcher in some way. She's spoken about, maybe reducing the size of the state and actually having better performing public services. So quite an interesting one. And she's the one I talk to a lot of Scottish Tories, and she's the one who they fear the most because they see her as, an attractive, reasonable person who you actually want to trust to run some of these public services in Scotland.
Right, OK, so there's that. And then, of course, we've got Ash Regan, who has joined the hunt very recently. Go on.
Yes, she has. I mean, she was distinguished for being the first minister to resign since the Scottish government, the SNP became the Scottish government in 2007, to resign on a point of policy, the first in 15 years. And that shows how divisive the gender recognition reform was. So she called that one right, I would say, politically. And she's really been campaigning to ditch this bill. But she's a bit of an outsider. And actually, the polling out today shows that she was the third of the three candidates in the public's mind. But of course, the one who everyone sort of seems to think is the front runner is the one who the party machine seems to be getting behind, which is Humza Yousaf, of course.
Yes, right, good. You've opened the Humza Yousaf door quite nicely for us here, James. So let's dive headfirst into it, shall we? Because this chap is the best known, OK? He's been around a long time. He's had several key prominent roles within the SNP and does, it's fair to say, quite like the media as well, doesn't he? So what's his track record at the SNP actually like?
Well, Humza Yousaf has never met a camera he didn't like, but he's earned the nickname Humza Useless, which Scottish Labour have been trying to make stick today because of his disastrous record in multiple briefs. He was Justice Minister before he was Health Minister, and there were sort of a number of public sector failings on his watch. Scottish Health Service is in dire straits. And before that, he was the junior Transport Minister, and he got fined for driving without insurance.
Yes.
So this is someone who, is seen as a loyal Sturgeonite, but actually, when it comes to delivering independence, if he can't deliver a decent health service, how can he do that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Or remember to insure his own car, I suppose, is one of them. There was also a rather interesting incident involving a nursery school, which I'm hoping you can caveat for me now.
Yes, of course. Well, he and his wife accused a local nursery of racism for how, they applied to send their child, they got told they couldn't get in, but another child with a less supposedly Muslim-sounding name was accepted, and they made these accusations of racism. And then, curiously enough, a fortnight or so ago, they dropped the case. And so, again, this is one of those issues where I suspect over the next month or so we're going to see more scrutiny because, as we saw with the gay marriage vote, Humza Yousaf probably hasn't put that issue to bed properly about whether he would vote for it or not. So if we're going to criticise Kate Forbes and be quite hard on her views, perhaps we ought to do the same for Humza.
Yes, there is, of course, that argument, isn't there, which is that what I find amazing is that a lady, all right, I mean, she possibly was a bit naive, I think, in the way that she went about saying the game. I mean, she should have learned from Tim Farron, OK? But, yeah, Humza Yousaf has potentially just done exactly the same thing for exactly the same reasons and appears to be getting away with it scot-free. What would be the best thing, do you think, in terms of, the Tory government? Who would they most like to have?
Well, first of all, I think they want a nice, long, bitter contest. We've already seen today Ash Regan calling for Nicola Sturgeon's husband to resign, questions for Humza Yousaf from attacks on front pages. So I think a nice, bitter contest, and then Humza Yousaf to be elected. And then it comes down to a question of competence. Nicola Sturgeon was a master of sort of taking everything back to the constitutional question, for which she had 45% of Scots behind her. I would say it would probably be Humza Yousaf as the least effective one. Certainly talking to ministers in government, that seems to be the one they're rubbing their hands for.
Well, there you go. James, thank you very much, as ever. And just in case people have missed your offering on Liz Truss, what is it?
Out of the blue, the inside story of her rise and fall.
Fantastic. Good lad. OK, James Heal there, who's been following the race closely, is the diary editor of The Spectator. He's a good lad as well, James. Right, OK, coming up, with GB News in talks now to broadcast, genuinely, the big fight between Lee Anderson, the Tory Deputy Chair, and Steve Bray, the Gobby Remainer. We are asking, should we have ring girls? OK, do we go the whole hog? Are ring girls sexist? Is it just a bit of good old-fashioned fun? But first, your latest news with the wonderful Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. The latest headlines this hour on GB News. A minute's silence was held across the UK this morning, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. People stood in silence across the UK, and at Downing Street, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, reflecting on the country's losses. And today, Britain has imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. And President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. And in Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the last 12 months as a year of pain and sorrow, but also of faith and unity. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have lost their lives following Russia's invasion, which has resulted in the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. In other news today, police in Northern Ireland say they're treating the shooting of an officer in Omagh in County Tyrone as terrorist-related, with the new IRA their main line of inquiry. Stormont says it's united in standing with the Northern Ireland Police Service after Wednesday's shooting. The man who was shot, Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell, remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital after being shot by two masked gunmen at a sports centre. His injuries are said to be life-changing. A fourth man has been arrested in connection with his attempted murder. And as you've been hearing, in Scotland, 3 candidates are now running to become the next SNP leader. Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan, all securing enough votes to advance to the next round of the leadership contest. They managed to secure the backing of at least 100 members from a minimum of 20 local branches. So a period of campaigning now begins, with the winner announced on the 27th of March. Those are your headlines. I'm back at 6.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, now I'm sure you'll agree that I am dressed very, very smartly. It is Friday after all. But let me tell you, some of my colleagues in the office, they're pretty scruffy, OK? They're pretty scruffy. So in a few minutes, I'm going to ask, should there be a dress code to work? Because apparently people are now dressing down to go to work. We're going to have a discussion on that. I am also going to be having a big discussion on whether or not ring girls are actually a sexist, outdated thing, or whether or not they're just, good old-fashioned fun. We're going to be talking to a former grid girl. She was at the Formula 1 to get the take on that. And, of course, I've been asking you guys as well whether or not you think that it makes you a racist if you'd rather house a Ukrainian refugee as opposed to a Channel migrant. And very strong views coming in on both sides of that, so we're going to get stuck into those. GBViews at gbnews.uk. And just a quick message to one of our viewers here who has emailed in with some ring girl suggestions and exactly why he would like them. You have very much emailed in on what would appear to be your wife's email address, and I am now in possession of that. So, yes, make sure that you're more careful in future. I will not name and shame you on national television, but there we go. Get your emails coming in. When we come back, we're having a big discussion about whether or not we should have ring girls. Are they sexist? Is it anti-feminism? We're also going to be talking about whether or not you think people who are less scruffy in the office do better. So, are you more likely to get a promotion if you've got a suit on, or if you come in flip-flops and slacks and whatever? So anyway, get your views coming in. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I will be back in just a tick for all of that to kickstart your Friday evening, people.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back here, ladies and gentlemen. I tell you what, it's always a great laugh behind the scenes. Now, new data has shown that UK companies are increasingly relaxing their dress code policies in favour of more casual dress. And this comes as just under 80% of UK jobs advertised this month promoted a relaxed attire, reaching a 4-year high. So, at the same time, just 5% of job adverts specify that people should wear smart, casual clothes. Is this a good move? Do you not think there's something good about putting a suit and tie on and going to work? And fundamentally as well, do you not think when bosses look to promote someone, they're more likely to promote the person who is in a suit and tie than the person who looks homeless? I think, but there we go. With me now is Liz Brewer, who's an etiquette and behaviour expert. Liz, thank you very much. What do you make of this? Should people be more formal in the workplace?
Well, look at you.
I know, it's not done me any favours, has it?
You look fabulous.
Thank you.
Wonderful. The thing about how you dress, first of all, it depends on the job you're doing. I mean, you can be your sort of back of house or in a basement doing a good job, and you dress accordingly. If you're front of house and if you're representing a company, and if you want to feel good and actually do a good job, it's for your own self-esteem to dress accordingly. You dress to make yourself feel good. You know, if you were sitting there in, you know, jogging outfit and I'm sitting there in glamorous PJs.
You look lovely as well, by the way. That took me far too long to say. Sorry, everybody. Yes. Carry on. I should have come straight back with that.
Yeah, but I've come straight from a glamorous lunch. So, so it's all a question of really what you do and what is appropriate. You go through the centuries. If we went back 100 or a couple of 100 years, you'd be sitting there looking like a peacock, wouldn't you? You'd be ruffles, the powdered wig, the velvet jacket. Things change, and things change due to what happens in the world. We've gone through a COVID and a pandemic, and because of that, we've relaxed. People have been slightly slovenly. They haven't needed to dress up. They've been, you know, behind.
I think it's a bad thing, OK? Because I know there's the work from home culture, etc., and there's all of this, and I get that. I'm not expecting it. But you know, when the pandemic first kicked off, people are going to slate me for this, but when the pandemic first kicked off and I was working from home, I actually did used to put a shirt and jacket on every day because it made me feel as though I was more productive.
Me too. I got up, I put on my makeup, I dressed, because not only did it make me feel better, but it also put me in the right frame of mind to do whatever I was doing, which was quite important. So I was going through all my files and feeling good. And I have to tell you, the odd postman or the delivery man used to get quite a shock because I'd be dressed up, not in my sort of slovenly, and it made me feel good. When you catch a glimpse of yourself in a mirror and you think, oh yes, great, and it actually makes you not only do better and feel better, but it's the way you portray yourself, even on the phone or on your computer, to other people.
I really do think that when it comes down to it, if bosses, serious people who make the decisions are genuinely looking at who to promote in a workplace, I really do think that appearance has something to do with it.
But also, if you are a salesman, and if you look at all those figures which I glanced through, and the averages, well, it is people who are very much front of house in sales, so selling property, selling luxury goods. If they turned up and they weren't sort of looking their best, and it's a question of grooming, it's a question of having, clean nails, having your hair brushed, and feeling good. But how can I sell something to somebody else, if I'm looking a bit slovenly?
Yes. So Gary's been on. Thank you for this, Gary, in the inbox. He says he's in the meat trade. He's got 2 shops. He recently advertised for a full-time member of staff. He interviewed 4 candidates. He said all 4 were equally qualified, but only one of them turned up wearing a suit and tie. He got the job. He'd made the effort to impress me, and you'll be dealing with the public. Exactly what you've just said there. And in a way now, do you think when we look at these figures that more and more and more jobs are basically saying, oh, it's a relax, they're advertising it as a plus, relax. Is it the decline of society?
I don't believe those figures represent reality. I honestly don't. Because, and that's why I question what kind of jobs. You can put a load of jobs where nobody's even seen. And even if they're not seen, they want to feel good. So it's very much a question of we've come out of the pandemic, we've come out of staying at home, we're now out and about, and we are competitive by nature.
Yes.
So if you've got people in a workplace, don't tell me that the girls aren't going to make an effort. Whether they're girls, boys, he's, she's, whatever.
Whatever these days, it's all right, whatever you are.
Well, it's still going to affect. You're not, if you, in a workplace, you want to feel good with the people around you. And also, every time I open my mobile, I'm being sold. And it's a lot of the time there's luxury goods, shoes, coats, and it's really how you look is how you feel.
Yes, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you look great, and you've made me and indeed the nation feel great. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming into the studio for us, Liz. Great to have you on the show.
Thank
Liz
you.
Freeview there, who's an etiquette and behaviour expert. And what a fabulous nearly end to this show. Right, but moving on now, because there is division in the office, people, OK? There's division in the office, all right? Staff here at GB News are undecided on whether we should have ring girls if we host a boxing fight between the straight-talking MP Lee Anderson and arch-remainer Steve Bray. The arguments on both sides make themselves. Some people are saying, hey, it's tradition, it adds to the event, it adds to the occasion, everyone else does it. Other people are saying it's an outdated sexist trope that puts women on an unrealistic pedestal and actually, in a way, victimises them. So there's that. But Leilani Dowding used to work in this particular industry. I've got here that you used to work as a ring girl. Is that correct? Was it you were a ring girl? Right, I didn't know whether you were in Formula 1 or whether you did it all, but we'll talk about all of this. But you've hit out at restrictions on the industry and accused people of hypocrisy, claiming celebrities like Sam Smith are celebrated for their body, while sometimes beautiful women are punished for it. Talk to me about this. And so if we do host a boxing match between Lee Anderson and Steve Bray, should we have ring girls?
I think you should have ring girls, and if Lee Anderson's in it, I'm actually happy to step forward and be not that anyone would want to see me doing it anymore, but you know what? I was a ring girl. I did the grids at Formula 1. I had a lovely life doing them. A lot of the girls that did it with me, they were at university and it was helping them pay their way through uni. So it was actually a really great opportunity for us. And it was really sad when all these I think there were a lot of women and feminists came out and said, look, it should be banned, it's outdated, it's degrading. Where are they when Sam Smith's flaunting himself, you know, all over social media and for the kids, dressed up like a pork loin, you know, just everywhere, and children can see it, and you know, everyone's silent, or they say he's brave and brilliant.
OK, all right, so the argument is that ring girls and other similar roles objectify women, and it's just a load of seedy men leering at them. We don't need that for entertainment. What would you say to that?
I'd say it was really fun. It was a fun time. And like I said, a lot of the girls were paying their way through university. It was great money for what we were doing, you know, 20 years ago. Couple of hours, couple of £100, just walking around with a card, or you know, doing the grids at Formula One was amazing. We got to see the races. It was a glamorous event. We were fully dressed. We had like cat suits on. You know, maybe when we did the rings, it was hot pants. But big deal. These were girls that looked after their bodies. We were healthy. We were just enjoying life, and there's nothing degrading about it. What's degrading is like when you see these men dressed as women, and it's a parody, like Eddie Izzard, and you know, the sexual appropriation of women almost in a caricature style. Now that's degrading, but that, you know, being a ring girl and a grid girl was just such a great time.
Well, I'm going to have to take your word for it. The market for the Patrick Christys ring girl is not. I'd be a ring boy. Now, there was actually a suggestion from somebody who emailed in, and I'm hoping I've got a name on this, but I can't seem to find it. Oh, yes, I can. It's Maggie. Maggie says we should not ban ring girls at male boxing matches. She says that we should introduce hunky ring boys at female boxing matches. And would you be up for that?
I'd watch. I mean, as long as it was two females fighting, not a male dressed as a woman fighting another female, then bring on the hunky males. You know, I'm all for it.
Yes, I agree. Although the way the world's going at the minute, you never know what you're going to get. What do you make of other women, looking to ban things? So women almost getting offended on ring girls' behalf, women saying we should cancel this, because I suppose there's a case to say that is women rendering other women unemployed, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what happened. I can't remember how long it was. I was living in America at the time, but that's just what happened. It was women that came out and said, women doing the grids, women walking darts players out on TV, ring girls, it's all degrading, and it left a lot of girls out of jobs. You know, they would do it on the weekends, as I said, paying their way through uni. It's not like being a stripper or something. These are girls that are dressed up, and you know, what are we left with? We're left with OnlyFans or something like that. So you know, there was nothing wrong with it. It was they had clothes on. And it was just such a shame, and I just felt it was a bunch of, it wasn't men, it was just a bunch of jealous women, and I don't even know for what reason they would be, that just can't appreciate the female form. You know, it wasn't like these were unhealthy girls, or someone like Elliot Page, who's plastered all over the newspapers with a double mastectomy trying to be a man. You know, these are young, healthy women. What was wrong with it? And they ruined the, you know, not that it was a career, it was a stepping stone to other things.
I mean, they replaced grid girls at one point. They replaced them with grid kids, I think, and just it was all happy, clappy children who were doing something. I don't know if the grid girls are back now. Probably not, the way the world's gone. There was a big debate about darts walk-on girls as well, and quite a lot of the darts walk-on girls came out and said exactly what you just said there, which is you understand that this is we are choosing to do this as a job and we enjoy it. You know, it's as straightforward as that. It'd be like someone just like rendering me unemployed because I enjoy doing what I'm doing now. Just Leilani, can I before I let you get going, can I just ask you? I mean, I don't quite have a contract here ready to sign, but I think I heard you say that if we do host the Lee Anderson-Steve Bray fight, did you offer your services as a ring girl for that fight?
You know what I did? I don't know. You can maybe poll it to your viewers. I don't know if anyone would actually want to see me do that at my age. But if they did, I would do it because I'm a big fan of Lee Anderson. And yeah, and like I said, by the way, no one was ever forced into doing that job. There were thousands and thousands of girls queuing up to take on those jobs. So, yeah.
Fair enough. Leilani, great to see you again. Thank you very, very much. And always enjoy our chats. Take care. Leilani Dowdy knows a broadcaster and campaigner and as well former ring girl, grid girl. Look, we are obviously being a bit tongue-in-cheek about all of this, but why not? Because, you know, well, it is a Friday after all, and as well, this is a debate that keeps rearing its head. The emails on this are absolutely fantastic. Not all of them, or indeed any of them at the moment, broadcastable, but there we go. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Keep your emails coming in. It's fair to say there's not a big market for me being one of the GB News ring girls, it must be said. But, you know, that's probably just because you've all got eyes. But lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts today. And I've asked you loads of questions, so let's just round off the show, shall we, with a few of them. I think this one is going to be on, yes, it is. It's going to be on the one that we led the hour in with, which was, why do you think that some people are more accepting of Ukrainian refugees than they are about Channel migrants? And lots of interesting comments here. John says, there is no war in France, so nobody leaving France in the small boats is a refugee. France is a safe country. OK. Graham says, a simple fact is that if someone enters the country illegally, they should not be allowed to stay, which is why the government is changing the law. Genuine refugees do not tend to need to try and seek illegal entry. So both people there going in off the method of entry into the United Kingdom there, and the fact that France, as you are right, is not a war-torn country. I went on holiday to France in January for my birthday, and I tell you what, they were certainly not a war-torn country. Andrew says, I would help Ukrainians rather than economic migrants every time because they have come from a genuine war-torn country. Here we go, people. OK, so there we go. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute belter of a week here on GB News. I've really, really enjoyed the pleasure of your company. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, but, of course, I know you will be all locked in, and stay tuned to GB News. I just want to say thank you very much to everyone, of course, who's tuned in over the course of the week. It's been a rip-roaring show, and, yeah, thank you so much, basically. I'll be back at 3 p.m. on Monday afternoon. Up next, we've got Jubes & Co. Now, Michelle Dewberry is away. It's going to be presented this evening by the wonderful Nana Queer, so make sure that you tune in for that. You all have an absolutely wonderful weekend, and make sure as well that you do get in touch with us throughout the course. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Everyone is getting in touch here to say that I actually would. Oh, one person has said that they want to see me as a ring girl when we host a fight between Lee Anderson and Steve Bray. Thank you very much. That's come from my mum. Have a great weekend, everybody.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update. It's Friday afternoon, which means the weekend is almost here. Most of us won't see much rain, a colder feel, particularly where it's windy. It's going to be mostly dry, though, because this area of high pressure is moving in. Not quite here yet, however, and this weather front has been slowly sinking south through the day across much of England and Wales. And it's still providing a bit of rain across parts of South Wales, southwest England this evening. Nothing too heavy, and it should clear away. Got a northerly wind. You'll have noticed that if you cross eastern Scotland and eastern England today, bringing a real chill. And that will continue overnight and will feed a few scattered showers into the east, but many places dry and clear and cold. Temperatures widely close to freezing in towns and cities and well below in rural spots, maybe as low as -4. So a chilly start to Saturday, but for quite a few it'll be a sunny start. We'll still have this breeze coming into eastern England, so it's going to be cold on these North Sea coasts, and there will be a few showers coming in at times as well. Nothing too heavy, and they should move through, but perhaps into parts of the Midlands, maybe southern England as well. But most places